Chapter 265. The next morning, the gloomy weather that had accumulated for a few days finally started to show its power. He kicked down the rising sun in the east and scattered the fine needles, one after another. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was very annoying. It lasted for a few hours, and it was still in this half-dead state. It seemed like it was purposely trying to test the patience of the nobodies below. Unfortunately, the people in the north were already used to this kind of treatment. Therefore, the nobles were still busy attending all kinds of parties, and the civilians were still working hard to make a living. The power of habit was strong, just like the people in Riva City today. They felt like something was missing after they woke up in the morning. What was it? Looking at the gray walls, they suddenly realized that the white paper that would appear every day was missing. No matter how the Bran officials advertised that the Grey Coat Army was a group of thugs, there would always be people who were touched after seeing those posters. Because what was written and painted on those posters was very realistic. It was an indisputable fact that the nobles bullied the civilians. It was also an indisputable fact that the nobles lived an extravagant and luxurious life. It was also a fact that the civilians lived in ragged clothes and didn't have enough food to fill their stomach. All of these happened almost every day, and it wasn't something that could be covered up by the simple descriptions in the newspapers. Therefore, even though the notice in Riva City forbade people from collecting posters, some people still secretly hid them. They would take them out when they were tired from work, or when they were having a meal, or when they were dreaming in the middle of the night. They would carve their most hated names on the fat nobles and curse them to their heart's content. Spiritual victory? Yes. Although it was useless, it would still make them feel better. Therefore, they would bring these posters home almost every day. There were too many people who hated the nobles. But today, those posters disappeared. Some people walked through a few streets, but they still couldn't find even one poster. Did they give up? Or were they caught? No one knew, just like they didn't know that a storm was slowly forming in the drizzle. The Riva City Guard Hall. Cavaliers were walking in and out of the hall. It was very busy here. If there were tourists who passed by here, they would exclaim about the security of this city. No one would have thought that this place was deserted a few months ago. Bang! The door of the guard hall was kicked open. Damn it! Can't you learn how to knock on the door? Bose removed his legs from the table as he roared. The lock is broken. Why are you knocking on the door? Needless to say, only the Bugnes could do such a thing and speak to Bose in such a tone. After fixing the bandage on his shoulder, Bose said angrily, "You still have the face to say that? You were the one who broke it." All right, since when did you learn the habit of being the chief of guards of Lion City?" Bugnes curled his lips indifferently. Then, he saw the bandage and raised his eyebrows. "Injured again? Weren't you fine last night?" Bose waved his arm casually. "Last night, I went out to look for food. There was a mole who didn't know what to do." "Oh." Bugnes nodded and did not ask any more questions. The mole was, of course, an assassin. If it were anyone else, even if they weren't killed, they would make a fuss about nothing. However, this was normal for Bose and Bugnes. Ever since they came to Riva City and became the chief of guards, being assassinated was a common occurrence. Sometimes it was even more than 3 times. If they were not assassinated for a few days, they would feel uncomfortable somewhere. Then, they would gather their men and take the initiative to look for moles to move around. "Here, this is the list of moles we caught this week. Send it to the judge." Bugnes handed over a wrinkled paper. What an unnecessary move. What's the point of a judge? Just send them to the gallows. Bose rubbed his red nose and took the paper. Bugnes chuckled. "Ha, you'll have to wait until you become a judge." Then, he looked down at the huge footprint on the table and shook his head. He swept away the pile of letters and sat on it. "What's this? Why is it piled up so high? What else could it be? Letters of protest from the nobles." Bose scratched his nose and wiped it with a piece of paper. He did not seem to care. The two of them had stirred up a storm in the city and destroyed many gangs. Of course, some of them were related to the interests of the nobles. Huh, there are so many of them? Bugnes was surprised. He looked at the letters all over the floor. If this was the case, they would have to pack up and leave Riva City. Bose shook his head. No. Most of them were sent recently. They want us to find the Grey Coat Army in the city. Haha, it seems that the propaganda in the city is giving them a lot of pressure. Bugnes rubbed his chin and chuckled. That's right. When I saw it, I wanted to beat up those nobles. What the hell are they doing? Bose was talking about the propaganda with words on it. It was all about the Grey Coat Army being bullied by the local nobles. With Bose's years of experience in solving cases, he could tell that it was true. Bugnes shook his head. It's none of our business. Well, no matter how much pressure they feel, it's useless. They missed their chance last night. Yeah. Bose heaved a long sigh. The scene last night was still vivid in his mind. The few members of the Grey Coat Army really made him feel emotional. 3 of them committed suicide by biting their tongues when they were caught. As for the other 2, the one named Colin confessed before they arrived at the police station. Now that he thought about it, it was obvious that he did not want them to have a chance to get more information out of him. What happened after that was needless to say. Bose could not help but shake his head when he thought about it. He felt like he had been hunting geese all day, only to be pecked blind by the geese. As for the subsequent search, although they were able to confirm their previous lodgings, the hotel was already empty. Then they searched the whole city, but they could not find them. This was expected. The city was so big, and it was nighttime. If they missed the hotel, they would not be able to catch them again. But I heard that the propaganda was gone this morning. I guess they were scared after this incident, so they temporarily hid. Bugnes guessed. That's possible. Bose nodded and said, but it's better if they can leave Riva City. I only want to catch the mole now. I have no interest in them. Sir. Just as Bugnes was about to reply, a voice came from the door. He turned around and saw a cavalryman standing at the door, sweating profusely. He kept looking at the footprints on the door. Come in, what's the matter? Bose stared at Bugnes. Bugnes curled his lips and jumped down from the table. Someone reported that the Grey Coat Army is doing propaganda in the square in the city. What? Bose and Bugnes exclaimed at the same time. They looked at each other. They just said that the enemy would hide for a while, but now they were here. Looking at the cavalryman who wanted to say something, Bose frowned. There's more. Ah yes. I heard that the nobles sent their guards to disperse the crowd, but they fought in the end. F***ck, who is this idiot? Bose slapped his forehead and was completely speechless. Of course, he knew the nobles' habit. Disperse? It should be a beating. If it was a normal situation, this method might be able to suppress them. But if the Grey Coat Army was at the scene, didn't they hear that they fought? The situation was obviously out of control. Pass down my order. All the cavalrymen in the hall gather at the door. Rewind time, an hour ago. The location was the square in the city. Although it was drizzling, the number of people in the square was not less than usual. It was still bustling with people. Since it was a square, of course there were fountains and decorations. In the center of the square, there was a heroic figure of a noble made of red ore. This was the first mayor of Riva City. It was under his rule that many mineral veins were discovered around the city. However, the discovery of the mineral veins did not bring any benefits to the residents of Riva town. On the contrary, it brought them endless pain. The farmlands were quickly occupied and built into roads. The residents were also tricked into becoming miners and hiding in the caves. In the end, they realized that they had nothing except for some pitiful money. Even the old houses had been demolished and turned into narrow slums. In contrast, there were more and more nobles here. The reason was simple. They were all here to fight for the mineral veins. Because there were no more farmlands, the residents had to become miners in order to survive. After the city was built, the nobles even claimed that the residents of Riva town had gloriously become citizens. But in reality, these residents had become poor. Just as the pedestrians in the square were about to walk to the opposite street, a group of people dressed differently appeared. At first, no one paid attention to them. There were thousands of people in the square. Who would pay attention to strangers? But then, some people stopped and stared blankly at the group of people who went straight to the red noble statue. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the whistling sound, raindrops splashed everywhere. In an instant, the red statue was tightly tied by the ropes in the hands of the group of people. Then, with a loud roar, the ropes tightened, and the soil under the red noble statue started to loosen. Then, it tilted, shook, and fell, boom! Rocks flew everywhere. The red glaze on the ground was like a blooming flower. It was very beautiful in the rain. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 266. Bowing to thank my book friends Moon Dota, JHT 121, and Dreams Never Die for their tips. Oh, and a ticket to the beauty of the setting sun. Thank you very much. There was a rule in the cities in this world, and that was to place the symbol at the center of the city. There were many reasons for doing so. Some of them placed a statue of the god of light there to worship the city. Some of them placed some unique items in the city to highlight the uniqueness of the city. Some of them placed the castellan's mansion in the center of the city. Without a doubt, the red statue in the central square of Riva City was the symbol of this city. It was built by the first batch of nobles who came here, and its purpose was to remind the nobles not to forget to kill pig. As for the residents in the city, of course, they didn't like this guy who made them poor. However, even though they didn't think much of it, they were still dumbfounded when they saw the broken statue on the ground. Sadness? Anger? None of them. Ecstasy? Excitement? That's not enough. The people only felt a faint sense of loss and deep shock. He was disappointed because this thing had been erected here for more than 100 years, and he had seen it frequently. Of course, he would feel a little uncomfortable when it suddenly shattered. The shock was even easier to understand. This statue was the symbol of Riva City, and it was built by the nobles. There was even a wooden sign next to it that said no climbing or touching. But now it was actually smashed into smithereens by this audacious group of people. While the residents in the square were speechless, another dozen people walked over with a pile of wooden boards. Bam! 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 Their movements were smooth and fast. After a short while, a simple small platform was built on top of the red gravel. At this moment, the residents finally realized what was going on. You are. A middle-aged man who looked like a businessman opened his mouth and stammered. An ordinary-looking young man heard him and turned his head. He squinted his long and narrow eyes and said with a smile, "We are from the city administration of Riva City, also known as the city management. We received a report from the residents that this red thing was built against the rules, and we are going to take it down now." City administration? The middle-aged man froze. Is there such a thing? Why haven't I heard of it before? I don't care where you're from, but I can tell you responsibly that you're in big trouble. A man dressed like a noble steward shook his head and said with pity. Of course, he knew the importance of this sculpture. He had never heard of this bureau in front of him. It should be newly established. From the looks of it, these noobs had been tricked. Sigh, how pitiful, something big? We're not afraid. The young man raised his head proudly. We're just temporary workers. Leaving behind two people who were baffled, these people who had suddenly appeared quickly disappeared into the crowd. Then, without waiting for the crowd to come back to their senses, a white-robed girl walked up the steps on the right side of the platform. Perhaps they were shocked by the destruction of the statue, or perhaps they were infected by the solemn expression of the young girl in the rain. No one made a sound. They just watched as she stepped onto the platform and walked step by step to the centermost position. Take a deep breath, bow, stand upright, and nod. Hello everyone, I'm Josiah from the Gray Coat Army. Whoosh, as if a level 10 storm had suddenly arrived, the buzzing of discussion instantly sounded, and then quickly spread to the entire square. The Gray Coat Army. This term was naturally not unfamiliar to the crowd, especially under the cover of a large number of propaganda papers in the past few days. But in the end, in most people's hearts, it was just a name. They never thought that there would be a day where they would see the Gray Coat Army just a few meters away. This feeling, it was like reading too many novels about heroes fighting against evil dragons, and then one day, the legendary dragon really appeared in front of them. Shock, astonishment, illusion. Before the crowd had time to sort out their emotions, Josiah on the stage spoke again. My purpose here is very simple. I want everyone to see what the official propaganda says about the ferocious, cruel, and insane Gray Coat mob is like. Phew. I'm sorry, I don't have enough breath. In fact, there are many such adjectives. I suspect that the people who compiled them are now very distressed because they have indeed used up all the words they can think of. Spreading out his hands, Josiah showed a distressed expression. A series of muffled laughter sounded from the crowd. The crowd had a complicated expression on their faces. This was the first time that they had seen the legendary Gray Coat Army in person. Mob bandits? Was it this calm girl who looked like an orchid in an empty valley in the drizzle in front of them? Stop joking. Then, I'm going to say something infuriating. While the atmosphere calmed down, Josiah pursed his lips. We've been in Riva City for 4 days, and we've done nothing but distribute propaganda. But just last night, right here, 5 of our companions were captured and left us forever. I don't know why. Could it be because we, the rioters, have been attacking the city recently? No. After pausing for a second, Josiah continued in an agitated tone, We just said something that we shouldn't have said. We only said that the nobles were greedy and took wealth that didn't belong to them, and they trampled on other people's lives. We only said that the civilians were poor, and they worked hard all their lives, but they couldn't get enough bread to fill their stomachs, and they couldn't afford the toys that their children wanted. What we said was the truth, but we suffered the most ruthless revenge. The words poured out like a storm, and it struck the deepest part of the crowd's heart, causing ripples in their hearts. A small commotion started in the square, and most of the poor people who were wearing ragged clothes had angry expressions on their faces. Of course, they knew that the girl on the stage was telling the truth. At this moment, who knows if what you said is true or not? Maybe you guys made it up. Didn't you guys do those things that were reported in the newspaper? Don't listen to her nonsense. 5 people died? Humph. Do you think it's true just because you said so? They deserve to die, Gray Coat Army rebels. At first, there were only 1 or 2 voices, but soon, voices of doubt and insults came from the crowd. Josiah was startled, and he instantly found the person who spoke. It was a short and fat middle-aged man in gorgeous clothes. He was dressed like a rich merchant, or someone sent by the nobles to purchase ores. Blood rushed to his head, and Josiah pointed at him angrily. You said that it was made up, but have you investigated it? Have you asked the people in the area where we live? If that's the case, why are you so sure that the content in the newspaper wasn't made up, but done by us? Sophistry. Maybe those people have already been bought over by you. The short and fat middle-aged man who was pointed out was stunned, and then he retaliated. Of course, what he said was just nonsense. Josiah and the others had only been here for a few days, so how could they have bought over the people on the street? But that wasn't important. What was important was his identity as an ore merchant. As someone who had a vested interest in the ore vein, he obviously wouldn't allow the Gray Coat Army to incite the miners to rebel. That's right, this B***TCH is obviously spreading rumors, don't be fooled. The Grey Coat Army is a mob. I once had a batch of goods stolen by them, and people were killed. Needless to say, this was obviously made up. People were killed, so how did he know that it was the Grey Coat Army who did it? Of course, no one was thinking about this now. Slandering didn't need a flawless reason, all one had to do was to say it. This person's words seemed to have inspired some people, and suddenly, all kinds of news of innocent people being killed spread. Time, place. It was all very well described. Such words also made some people who were originally angry start to waver. There was no doubt this was the truth. The people wouldn't be convinced, and people were naturally suspicious. The people were also easily convinced because the habit of following blindly was huge. This saying wasn't contradictory, and history constantly proved these 2 points. At this time, the most important thing was the situation. When the people around them saw people crying and describing the crimes of the Grey Coat Army, they naturally couldn't help but believe it. Josiah's hoarse explanation had long been drowned out, the balance was constantly tilting. At this time, no one knew where it came from. Vegetable leaves, potatoes, shoes, all of them were thrown towards the platform. Josiah stood on the platform, and didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. Not far away, at the top of the clock tower. Bang! David punched the wall, turned his head, and said with red eyes, "Boss, I'll bring people to kill this bunch of nonsense." Tangen's expression was cold, and he looked down at the thin figure who seemed to have been abandoned by the whole world, and shook his head. "We have other things to do." Tangen didn't agree with Josiah's suggestion last night at first. It was too risky and it might not be effective. However, the former exploded with unprecedented stubbornness and was determined to do so, and the two even had a small argument. Narrowing his eyes, Tangen let out a long breath, and turned his head to look into the distance. "Josiah, you chose the method yourself. I only hope you can persevere." Suddenly, a sound came from the stage. The sound was really soft, so soft that some people who were about to rush to the platform didn't hear it, but the square fell into a dead silence at this moment. Everyone saw a blue flash in front of their eyes, and then an oval-shaped cover appeared on the girl's body. Magic, magic shield. Everyone's impression of mages was that they were mysterious and noble, and they didn't often appear in front of others, and they covered their faces with robes all day long. However, even a child knew that the mysterious mages had a skill that could protect themselves. Magic shield. She was a mage? We're hitting a mage? Everyone was dumbfounded, and their frightened thoughts were magnified by the mage's strange attacks. Waving his cane, Josiah removed the magic shield, ignoring the mess on his body. He spoke calmly. "Someone told me last night that my plan wouldn't work, because the people are ignorant, and I had a quarrel with him. But now I agree with his point of view. Yes, you're not only ignorant, but also stupid. Cowards, cowards. You only know how to resign yourself to adversity, only know how to hide and scold injustice. But you never dare to open your mouth and shout. Stand up and start resisting. I despise you." Josiah said word by word, looking at the crowd that was gradually becoming restless, and a mocking smile hung on his lips. "What, are you angry? Ha, unfortunately, you only know how to be angry. You know that reality is unfair, and you hope that someone can stand up and solve all this, but you also hope that it's not you, right? Ha, it seems that I was wrong just now. You're not stupid, on the contrary, you're very smart. Yes, funny little cleverness. If Tangen was here, he would definitely rub his eyes." Josiah's character was not lacking in gentleness, stubbornness, and persistence. But he had never been like this, like a calm shrew, sarcastic, mocking, and disdainful. However, such words that seemed to give up on themselves had some unknown effect. The breathing of the surrounding people became coarse, and their fists were secretly clenched. Of course, it was unknown who they were going to beat up. "Oh, I almost forgot about you." Josiah glanced at the few people who rushed to the platform and curled his lips. "Rich merchants? Nobles? Lackeys of nobles? I knew it was you with one guess. Do you know why I had to smash that red sculpture? Because it's just like you, every pore is stained with filth. You squeezed every bit of the poor people's flesh and blood to enrich yourselves. In the end, even the color of your skin became blood red. Of course, no matter how much you soaked in it, it couldn't change your black hearts. I'm a magician, not a wizard. But I still curse you, curse the souls of the dead on every gold coin in your arms, to haunt you forever. Until your descendants, your descendants, your descendants. At this point, Josiah's tone paused, and he frowned as he looked at the edge of the square. Because of the height of the platform, she could see that there were about 70 to 80 guards who were neatly dressed in armor, pushing through the crowd and walking towards her. Further away, there were a few nobles' carriages parked by the side of the road, and a few people on them were pointing at her. Suddenly, the crowd began to become chaotic. The dozens of guards were divided into two groups. One group was still walking towards the center, while the other group began to use their scabbards and whips to disperse the crowd. Tang En, who was on the clock tower, also saw this scene, and his eyes couldn't help but brighten. Haha, the opportunity is here. Which idiot is this? I want to thank his 8 generations of ancestors. Don't underestimate the power of small people, and don't underestimate the power of small incident. Bose had a deep understanding of the former, and the nobles who were far away from the latter would definitely remember the latter. In fact, these nobles happened to pass by here, but when they looked out of the window out of boredom, they found the quiet crowd in the square. After asking around, they found out that it was the Grey Coat Army who was promoting here. Then, they acted very decisively and immediately sent people to capture and disperse the crowd. These two tasks weren't really a problem. Capturing the Grey Coat Army was something they had to do. After all, both sides' standpoints were there for all to see. As for the latter task, well, if it was done at another time, it wouldn't be a problem. Although the number of guards was small, it was more than enough to deal with the commoners who didn't dare to resist. But now, the commoners were full of anger from Josiah's mockery, but they couldn't vent it. Originally, they should have done something to Josiah, but the other party was a magician, and what she said just now had vaguely revealed their shame, making them feel ashamed to do anything. At this moment, the guards came over and whipped them as usual. This seemed to confirm what Josiah had said just now. You are being bullied, but you only know how to resign yourself to it, and don't dare to resist. You are all cowards, all right. A group of men being scolded by a young girl like this was really embarrassing. Don't dare to resist? Now I'll show you the opposite. No one knew who was the first to make a move. Most people only heard a loud roar. Damn it, beat them up. We are not cowards. Not cowards. In an instant, the crowd surged, and fists were like a forest. The dozens of armored guards were immediately drowned by the crowd, and couldn't do anything. The curtains of chaos had been raised. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 267. Throughout history, there were always some big events that shone brightly. They might be the rallying cry of a certain hero, or the turning point of a certain group of forces, or the beginning of a disastrous war. No matter what, they would always leave behind countless topics for future generations to talk about. As for the evaluation, it would either be passed down through the ages or be infamous for 1,000 years. However, there was an interesting thing that people rarely noticed. The fuse of these so-called big events was usually a misunderstanding, a small probability event, or even an impulse. A typical example, the incident in Riva City. In fact, this incident wasn't a big one, and the area it affected was very small. However, it was undeniable that it played a very important role in a force in future generations, and it had an extraordinary meaning. However, no one knew that it was only the decision of a stubborn girl, the impulsive action of a group of men who were ashamed, and the stupid action of a few bored nobles. For the guards who came in first, The outbreak of chaos was very sudden and inexplicable. Those docile sheep who didn't fight back in the past suddenly turned into man-eating lions with blood-red eyes. Before the guards could pull out their long swords, they were directly smashed to the ground by the ocean-like fists, and then countless feet stepped on them. The dozens of people were like leaves in the ocean, and they were instantly turned into the first victims of this chaos. And those vampires! Kill them! Seeing the blood, the people's rationality started to fade away, and the things that were suppressed in their hearts kept expanding. The few people who were about to rush onto the platform became the second targets, and the crowd instantly swarmed over. Josiah on the platform was a bit confused. She didn't expect things to develop like this. To be honest, she was about to give up, and that was why she scolded and ridiculed the people who were angry at her for not fighting back. But now, she succeeded? Josiah glanced at the ferocious crowd, and she couldn't help but murmur in her mind, "Isn't this success a bit too big?" She was only here to promote, but these people in front of her seemed to be about to riot. In fact, the situation was exactly like that. In just a moment, those rich businessmen were directly drowned by the crowd. Then, the people opened their blood-red eyes and looked around for the next target to vent their anger. At this time, Josiah waved her hand and shouted, "We want fairness, we want power. We want fairness. We want to increase the price of the ore to 30 copper coins. We want to reduce the tax." With Josiah's shout, the crowd gradually calmed down, and then all kinds of demands came out. Gradually, the girl on the platform started to shout. Tang En on the platform couldn't help but wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. The situation just now was really dangerous. Although those people wouldn't attack on Josiah, they would definitely start destroying the city. Obviously, it was impossible for these people to occupy the city. In the end, they could only be forcefully suppressed. At that time, the casualties would be unimaginable. Needless to say, the gray coat would be blamed. However, before Tang En, his expression had changed, and the people were all the people who had been attacked. From his vantage point, the aristocrats sent more than 100 guards to rush in. F***ck. Even if you're stupid, you should know your limits. Of course, those aristocrats weren't stupid. They were just blinded by the humiliation. In their hearts, these people in front of them were just lowly people. They were born to be ruled, but now they dared to openly resist and even kill their guards? They felt that their authority was being challenged, and without thinking, they sent all the remaining guards forward. And this time, their swords were unsheathed. Among the screams, there were casualties among the shouting people. Looking at the shiny steel swords, the crowd subconsciously began to retreat. When the guards saw this, their courage was suddenly boosted. The uneasiness caused by the tragic fate of their companions immediately dissipated, and they charged in like tigers into a flock of sheep. At this moment, whoosh! A blue ice arrow shot out at high speed, and with a bang, it pierced through the thigh of a guard. Putting down his magic wand, Josiah's face was frosty. Attack! Seeing the people lying in pools of blood, Josiah's eyes instantly turned red, and he immediately gave the order to attack. Kill! Beat these bastards to death! The tide of people paused, and then shouts rose from all directions. The turbulent crowd once again charged back. As long as they let go of the fear in their hearts, how could 100 guards withstand the tens of thousands of people here? In just a few exchanges, the guards had no choice but to retreat pathetically. At this time, the aristocrats at the back had hurriedly boarded their carriages and fled. Then, all kinds of decorations were pushed aside, and the buildings at the side were gradually affected. "It's a mess, it's a mess!" Twain rubbed his forehead and muttered. The situation was much more serious than before, and it was no longer something that could be controlled. Even Josiah couldn't do it. Now, no matter what obstructions there were, they would be crushed by the violent venting after a long period of oppression. "Boss, the police station is on the move," David said anxiously. Tang En suddenly turned his head, and saw a figure waving a red signal flag on a tall building in the distance. Very efficient. And, give the order, carry out the original plan. Although the situation had changed, no matter what, Tangan couldn't let the police cavalry come over to arrest people. Yes. David waved a few green flags and gave the signal. The center of the city was where many important buildings were gathered, and no mistakes could be made. Bose knew this very well, so he couldn't wait to rush over after gathering some cavalry. The police station wasn't far from the central square. Normally, it would only take about 20 minutes on horseback. But now, Chief, the road ahead is blocked. Not long after they set off, a cavalry pulled on the reins and quickly reported. Bose frowned. What's going on? Some statues on the side of the road suddenly fell and blocked the road. Bose was stunned, and then he waved his hand. Change the road. Of course, there was more than one road leading to the center of the city, and the distance between them was only a matter of distance. However, not long after the police cavalry changed the road, they stopped again. This time, there was no need for a report. Bose saw a 3-story shop fall on the road, surrounded by a crowd of people. What a coincidence! Bugnes touched his chin and shook off the rain. It's just a coincidence. The first time was a coincidence, but the second time might not be. Bose narrowed his eyes, looked around, and said decisively, Take the Nobles Road. Just like Lion City, Riva City also had Nobles Road. The rules were similar, and other than the Nobles' cars, no one else could pass. However, Bose was not a normal person, and the situation was urgent, so of course he didn't care. He turned his horse around and was the first to enter the Nobles' Road. Clop clop clop. The quality of the Nobles' Road was quite good. It was spacious and flat, and there weren't any potholes. Landing on it, the thunderous sound of horse hooves sounded more pleasant. Naturally, there were some nobles' cars on the road, but after seeing the aggressive cavalry, they didn't have time to curse and immediately moved aside. Although Bose hadn't been here for long, the nobles had experienced his crazy personality. If they didn't move aside now, they would probably be run over. Unfortunately, the smooth ride didn't last long, and the sound of horse hooves stopped. This time, what appeared in front of them were 3 or 4 fallen nobles' carriages. They seemed to have crashed into each other and blocked the entire road. Moreover, these nobles didn't seem to get along, and were arguing fiercely at the side. Behind them, there were a few nobles' carriages that were helplessly blocked. F***CKU. After being blocked time and time again, Bose's expression was rather ugly. Without saying anything else, he pulled out his sword and jumped off the horse. You were the one who crashed into me, and you're still arguing. Bullshit, my carriage was in front, how could it have crashed into you? What are you talking about? I was in front, how could you have crashed into me? The 3 nobles argued until their faces turned red, while the coachmen who were actually driving the carriages stood there in confusion. To be honest, they didn't know what was going on, but the carriages suddenly went out of control. Chief Bose. You came at the right time, come and judge. A middle-aged noble saw Bose and hurriedly called out. All right. Bose agreed and waved his sword to cut the reins cleanly, freeing the fallen horses. However, a few of the horses didn't take the opportunity to run to the side. Instead, they whinnied and kicked their hooves, a cold glint flashing in their eyes. Looking at the few iron nails, Bose's eyes twitched and he raised his sword high. Chi, red fighting aura instantly covered the carriage, followed by a few crescent-shaped sword chi slashing horizontally, hitting the carriage. Boom, boom, boom. Fighting aura surged, and broken wood flew everywhere. A few carriages that were connected together were smashed to pieces, and the road was cleared in an instant. Done. Without looking back, Bose mounted his horse and waved his hand. Let's go. Ta-ta-ta, the long line of people whizzed past, and the splashing water drenched the stunned nobles. Although they passed smoothly, Bose's expression didn't improve. Of course, this wasn't because he was worried about the noble's revenge, but because of the iron nails just now. Now, he could confirm that there was a group of people watching them, preventing them from going to the city square. These obstacles on the road meant that the other party was already prepared. The road ahead wouldn't be peaceful. Boom. While thinking, Bose's eyelids twitched, and he suddenly raised his head, looking at the rising airwaves caused by the explosion in the distance. This. Bose and Bugnes looked at each other, and the latter shook his head and sighed. After turning a corner, they knew what the explosion just now was about. As expected, a huge hole appeared on the smooth road of the nobles, directly cutting off the road ahead. Phew! Bose rubbed his red nose and raised his head to let out a long sigh of relief. After knowing that someone was behind this, he was no longer depressed. After thinking calmly for a few seconds, Bose pointed with his finger. Dismount and move forward. You lead a group. I don't care what method you use, even if you have to crawl, you have to reach the city square in 20 minutes. Yes. The soldier who was pointed out didn't dare to say anything, and immediately dismounted and led dozens of people into the roadside alley. On the other side, Bugnes nodded, and also led some people into the fork in the road. As for Bose, he led the rest of the people along the edge of the hole and continued forward. Of course, 2 legs couldn't outrun 4 legs, but they had no choice now. It was impossible to go around on horseback, and based on the current situation, there were probably many obstacles waiting for them in front. Although walking on horseback would be slow, they could move in a straight line, and it wouldn't be so easy to stop them. But would it really be so smooth? If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 268. It was drizzling in the long alleyway. The city planning in the other world was not very effective, or rather, there was no clear planning except for the noble district. Therefore, no matter where one was, one could see all sorts of intersecting alleyways of varying lengths. The one in front of them was close to the center of the city, so it was not like the deserted alleyways in the remote corners. However, the people who lived here all hurriedly closed their doors and windows, peeking through the gaps at the garrison cavalry who were sprinting through the water. Quick, 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 quick. As they ran, the leader of the cavalry urged loudly. Of course, it was not easy to reach the center of the city within 20 minutes. Therefore, all the cavalry teams chose to pass through the alleyways and move forward in a straight line. Did something big happen? Some of the residents thought about the sudden explosion just now and guessed. However, in an instant, they opened their mouths wide and held their breaths. Whoosh, 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 bang, 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 ah. Damn it! Defend! Defend! Amidst the noise, the few rows of cavalry at the front looked as if they were struck by lightning. They flew back a few meters and smashed into their companions behind them. A few arrows pierced through their armor and nailed them to their bodies that were facing the sky. Some arrows pierced through their defenseless heads, and the light in their eyes gradually disappeared. The drizzle neutralized the trickling blood, and in an instant, a large area was dyed red. After a few rounds of arrow rain, the cavalry quickly set up a frontal defense and gradually pushed forward, protecting some of their injured companions. Whoosh, 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 ah, damn it, behind! They're behind, ah! The cavalry's defensive formation was instantly thrown into chaos. It was as if in the drizzle, they could not see the enemy at all, and could not determine the direction of the attack. They could only hear the continuous whistling of arrows and the cries of their injured companions. It was like the mad laughter of the Grim Reaper. Over there, above the left front and left back alleyways, attack. After the initial panic, some of the cavalry judged the enemy's position from the trajectory of the arrows. As soon as they finished speaking, dozens of spears stabbed over. Bang! Ah! I can't see, I can't see. The attacking cavalry only saw a bright light before their eyes, as if the sun had suddenly risen in front of them. Their vision was filled with white, and they could not help but cry. After that, the whistling of arrows became more frequent. After a while, the alley returned to silence. The group of residents stood by the window of the attic, looking down at the cavalrymen who were groaning and groaning on the ground. Because they were looking down from above, they saw the attacker. They were 7 or 8 ghosts in black armor. They ran silently on the narrow wall with the crossbows in their hands firmly aimed downwards. Pull the trigger, load the arrow, pull the trigger, load the arrow. It was always a mechanical and standard action. The residents felt as if they could see through the rain and see their indifferent faces. The whole process only lasted for 2 minutes before the black-armored spirits retreated in an orderly manner. However, the residents who saw it had reason to believe that this nightmarish scene would repeat in their minds and dreams. Similar scenes were playing out in the other alleys. The people in the city square were venting their violence, while the alleys here were carrying out a silent and bloody massacre. Of course, not every team suffered heavy losses. At a certain place, the black-armored men were in trouble. They were tightly entangled and unable to break free. This way. Don't step on that, there's a trap. Yes, I see you. A middle-aged man with a green spear led dozens of cavalrymen through the complicated alleys. In front of them, in the rain, a few black figures were running wildly. Needless to say, this middle-aged man was Bugnes. A few minutes ago they were ambushed as well, but they were instantly neutralized by his flawless spear skills. At this moment, he was following the tracks left behind by the enemy, casually pointing out the various traps. However, although he had discovered the enemy's whereabouts, Bugnes was not as relaxed as he appeared to be. He was worried about the other teams of cavalrymen. He could easily neutralize the ambush of the black-armored men in front of him, but the same could not be said for the others. For some reason, he had a feeling that the enemy was familiar with him. The change of route, the choice to walk, the division, everything seemed to be under the enemy's control. At this moment, a cold light fell from the sky, quickly cutting through the veil and heading straight for his throat. The black figures running in front of him stopped in an instant. With a whistling sound, 3 crossbow bolts shot toward his chest in a triangular formation. Good. Bugnes could not help but praise silently. The angle and timing of this attack were perfect. If it had been anyone else, this ambush might have succeeded. However, he was an assassin who had been tested many times. The green spear was instantly raised, sticking close to his body and pointing at the sky at an angle. Bugnes knew that the 3 crossbow bolts in front of him were only a feint. The real threat was the dagger that was about to pierce his neck. Ding-bang! In the blink of an eye, the tip of the spear hit the dagger. The attacking figure paused in midair, and then the green spear's tail swept across his ribs. Gotcha! With a groan, the black figure used the force to leap back, flipping over the top of the wall. He staggered a few steps and almost fell down. Disregarding his broken ribs, the feminine-looking attacker stared down at Kieran. Clang! 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 Bugnes waved his spear and drew a beautiful arc in the air, accurately circling the 3 crossbow bolts. Swoosh! 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 The attacker on the wall was shocked. He did not expect that the crossbow bolts he used to surround and kill the enemy would end up shooting at him. He bent his waist and jumped sideways. The 3 crossbow bolts brushed past his body and flew into the sky. Although he had dodged them, he was not happy at all. Because, swoosh! The green light shot out from the spear and shot up from below. Captain Michaud! Be careful! Anxious shouts could be heard as a few black figures rushed over from afar. However, it was obvious that they were too far away to help. It was not that Michaud did not want to dodge, but there was no way he could. In order to avoid the 3 crossbow bolts, he had used up all his strength and could not control his body at all. He could only watch as he was sent into the spear. Bugnes knew this very well. Am I going to die like this? I haven't even avenged my family yet. What a joke. If Boss is here, He'll definitely be able to avoid it. Michaud closed his eyes as these thoughts flashed through his mind. Suddenly, bang! Shock waves surged, and Michaud felt as if his body had been entangled by a string, and he was instantly pulled back. He opened his eyes. A blood-red radiance shone brightly, and the green radiance was blocked by a pitted dagger. Phew! Well done! Michaud's soft voice echoed in his ears, and then his body was sent back to the wall by a gentle force. Boss! Michaud, who was on the verge of death, could clearly identify the owner of the voice. He stood firm and looked down. The person who arrived just in time was Tang En. After taking control of the situation, he quickly rushed over. He knew how powerful bows and bugnies were. They were not something that Michaud and bugnies could resist. After saving Michaud, Tang En stepped on the wall and jumped up. His body instantly pulled out 8 phantoms in the air and disappeared. Then, he flashed down like a ghost and covered all the vital parts of Bugni's body. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, all done in one go. Empty kill. Bugni's pupils shrank instantly. He felt that something was wrong when the spear was destroyed. This kind of attack was a bit familiar. Holding the middle section of the long spear in his hand, he flicked his wrist, and the silk-like green spear shadows fluttered around him, rapidly forming a dense defensive round cover. If there was someone with sharp eyes here, he would find that under this kind of spear shadow, even light rain couldn't enter. This was really what bows had praised before. At this time, the red light seemed to have crossed the space and arrived in front of the spear. Ding, ding, ding! The blood-red dagger shadow and the cyan spear shadow instantly intertwined with each other in a torrential downpour. Confrontation, entanglement, breakthrough, collision in the short span of a few breaths. Twain's figure could no longer be seen in the alley, leaving only a dense cluster of blood-red dots. Bernie's expression was grim. He wasn't sure where the enemy was at this moment. Of course, it was meaningless to talk about this now. In such a fast-paced battle, the eyes were a burden. Battle intuition was the key. Bang, bang, bang! The width of the passageway wasn't very wide, and the spears that missed left holes in the surrounding walls. No, it's too fast. Bugni's could not help but take half a step back to cushion the strong pressure from Michaud. But soon he realized that he had made a stupid decision. Retreat, retreat, and retreat, advance, advance, and advance. With half a step wrong, the spear shadow gradually disappeared. Bugni's could only rely on continuously retreating to maintain his defense. Calm down, not good. Bugni's only felt a blur in front of his eyes. The red light entered and the figure once again appeared in his line of sight. But this time, both sides were very close. His defense had been broken. Hiss, 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 1 gave birth to 2, 2 gave birth to 4, 4 gave birth to originally, it was just a small red dot, but in an instant it kept splitting in the narrow space. Finally, it became a situation of thousands of arrows. Roar! At this time, Bugni's had no other choice. He abandoned his spear and urged his dochi. A set of armor emitting green light appeared on his body. He did not know why, but he suddenly felt that this scene was very familiar, as if he had experienced it before. Puff, 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 the figures merged and separated. One stayed where he was, while the other flew towards the cavalry behind him. The latter figure trembled violently in the air, blood blossoming everywhere. Bang! He fell, smashing into a large group of cavalry who wanted to catch him. Raising his eyebrows, Tang En kept his dagger. It seems that your strength has not improved. Puff. It's you, it's you. Bugni's opened his mouth and spat out a mist of blood, trembling as he pointed forward. In his mind, the battle at the Flame Dragon Society's encampment in Lion City slowly appeared. In that battle, Tang En had also closed in on him, and he was injured in the end. But at that time, it was mainly because he was careless, and Tang En's injuries were not light either. But now, he was defeated so easily, his strength did not improve? How could that be? Through assassination after assassination, Bugnes knew that his strength was constantly increasing. It was just that his opponent had improved even more and was even more terrifying. Bingo, you're right. It's a pity that there's no reward. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 269. The chaos in Riva City was still ongoing. The drizzle couldn't extinguish the fire that was ignited in the citizens' hearts. Since the chaos didn't stop at the beginning, a large number of passers-by joined in. The situation was getting worse and worse. Most of the traffic in the city was paralyzed. The central square was where most of the main roads had to pass through. Now that the square was in a mess, the roads were cut off. Some of the nobles' carriages were flipped over when they passed by. If the guards didn't try their best to save them, even the nobles themselves would have been killed. As the number of people increased, the area of the chaos expanded as well. As mentioned before, the city was a place where many important buildings gathered. These buildings were the tools that the nobles used to rule the city, such as the City Construction Hall and the City Hall. The result was obvious. The angry people rushed to these places like a flood. Although they were government organizations, they didn't have a strong defense. After all, they were mostly in charge of administrative work, not the guards. Therefore, under the waves of people, it was quickly washed away. Without witnessing it with their own eyes, no one would believe that the unarmed citizens could cause such great destruction. The thick walls and thick pillars were all torn down. The fancy decorations and exquisite doors were crushed into pieces. The rulers of Riva City should be glad that the Castellan mansion wasn't built here. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to escape this fate. News of the chaos quickly spread across Riva City. The nobles were shocked and sent people to report the incident to the guards. However, they were told that all the cavaliers were already on the way. In fact, there were indeed some cavalrymen who had arrived. There were not many people in the gray space, and Tangen had mainly focused his blocking power on Bose and his men. Therefore, after a few twists and turns, these cavalrymen who had set off later still managed to arrive successfully. However, without a powerful leader, these cavaliers couldn't help but back off when they saw the sea of people in front of them. After another hour, the nobles finally received the news that Bose and Bugnes, the two chiefs of guards and cavaliers, were admitted to the treatment center. They stopped cursing and started to contact each other and gather all their private soldiers. They decided to suppress the chaos. Unfortunately, it was too late for them to realize what was going on. The chaos lasted from noon to the evening, and the hot-headed people gradually came to their senses. At this time, except for a few statues of the Temple of Light standing alone in the square, everything else was destroyed. Looking around, there was a flattened administrative structure, a destroyed opera house, and a messy shop. Other than the fact that the ground wasn't cracked open, this place looked like the scene of a powerful earthquake. It was undeniable that most of the damage here was caused by the rioting citizens, but the looted shops were obviously done by people with ulterior motives. But no matter what, these debts had to be placed on everyone's heads. In fact, this was the result of Josiah trying his best to limit it. She was the flag-bearer among this group of people. Although she couldn't stop them, wherever she pointed, that place would be destroyed. After receiving the signal from the gray space personnel and seeing the stunned crowd, Josiah began to advise the crowd to disperse quickly. At this moment, the citizens also knew that things had gotten out of hand. They had a great time smashing the shops, but when they came back to their senses, they knew that they were about to get their revenge. Without saying anything, the crowd ran in all directions and disappeared into the alleys. Not long after, large groups of guards wearing all kinds of armor appeared on the surrounding roads. However, when they started to shout, they found that the square was already empty. The only thing left was the mess on the ground and the drizzle. The nobles who arrived at the square were naturally displeased, and they all asked the guards to arrest the rioters. But soon, they realized that this was a stupid decision. It was true that they wanted to arrest the rioters, but who should they arrest? The tens of thousands of people who participated in the rioting were only a small part of the population of Riva City. No one could remember the faces of these small figures. They couldn't possibly arrest all the people in the city just to find them. After a short discussion, the nobles decided to arrest the leaders first. The Grey Coat Army was their first target, especially the young female mage in the white robe who left a deep impression on them. Of course, the chaos that shocked the upper level of Riva City wasn't going to end so easily. The nobles wouldn't let go of the untouchables, who dared to challenge their authority. After deciding on the plan to arrest the Grey Coat Army, the nobles gathered together and discussed how to carry out the cleansing. Although they didn't know who the rioters were, the nobles didn't care. What they needed to do was to use this as an excuse to make an example out of these untouchables and intimidate them. However, the nobles didn't know that while they were shouting and yelling, a group of people who were hiding in the dark were also making their moves. West of the city, there was a large clinic. Although it was evening, there were still many people in the clinic. Many fully armed cavalrymen with the emblem of the garrison hall could be seen around the clinic. They surrounded the entire treatment center and looked around vigilantly. Inside the clinic, the injured cavalrymen who had taken off their armor were receiving treatment and pulling out the arrows that were nailed to their bodies. Inside the clinic, the atmosphere became more serious. This was the critical area. At this time, in a room in the critical injury area, Bose, who had just received treatment, indeed saw an acquaintance, as Tangen had said. So, this is the guy who fought with us at the base of the Flame Dragon Union in Lion City? Bose asked while lying on the bed. He was wrapped up in bandages and looked like a mummy. That's right. On the other side, Bugnes, who wasn't in a better condition, nodded and sighed. I didn't expect him to become so powerful. I told you that he was a troublemaker. Now it seems like he is. Bose raised his hand, but he couldn't reach his nose, so he put it down. The atmosphere in the ward was a bit gloomy. The assassin who was defeated by them in the past had now defeated them both. How embarrassing! But then again... Bose turned his head with great effort, his eyes flashing with a playful light. Bugnes, you are too weak. You were taken down in one move. If you could hurt him, I might have won the battle just now. Cough cough. Bernie's body was trembling, and he was lucky that the wounds that he had just bandaged almost burst open. His face was flushed. I was careless. If I had turned on my battle power armor, he wouldn't have defeated me so easily. Also, it was your tactical mistake that allowed him to take advantage of you. The first half of the sentence was of course an excuse. However, Bugnes was indeed good at defense and not offense. If he and Bose worked together, Tangen wouldn't have been able to send them into the clinic together. Bose ignored the second half of the sentence and laughed heartily. Haha, the battle aura armor didn't open. This sentence is really familiar. It seems like you said it before, cough cough. Bose was so excited that the wound on his chest that had just been treated started to hurt again. Bugnes was a bit embarrassed. He changed the topic. I wonder how the square in the city is right now. Bose shook his head and said, It's not that bad. Without us, those nobles would have escaped by the time they realized what was going on. Bugnes knew that as well. He nodded and said, If so many of them left the scene, it would be hard to catch them. TSK. Riva City is not going to be peaceful these days. Bugnes knew what those nobles would do. After being humiliated like this, it was impossible for them not to find someone to kill. Not necessarily. Bose narrowed his eyes and said, That person injured us, so he must have planned to do the same. It's better if those nobles don't take revenge now. If they do. Humph. Bao pursed his lips and didn't look optimistic. You have a point. Bugnes paused for a second. Then, He remembered what Bao's plan was, so he nodded and agreed. Then, he raised his eyebrows and asked, "So, Bao, you transferred most of the cavaliers here to avoid this?" Bullsh *t. Bose curled his lips in disdain and said, "I did it for my own safety." Bugnes opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. Bose was telling the truth. Ever since they came to Riva City, they became the target of all the assassins and gangsters. Once the news that they were injured got out, those people would definitely come and hit them when they were down. Knock, knock, knock. As they were talking, someone knocked on the door. "Director Chief, a nurse is here to change the bandages for you." "Okay, come in." The door opened, and the two cavaliers moved aside to let a young woman in a nurse's uniform walk in with a tray in her hand. "Shoo!" Bugnes pursed his lips and whistled loudly. "Hey Bao, you have a nice body." This nurse indeed had a nice body. Her breasts were especially round and straight. Coupled with her delicate and pretty face, she had a different kind of charm. Sorry. He's a middle-aged bachelor. You know that." Bose made a regretful expression at the blushing woman and said seriously. The woman bit her lips and nodded gently. Then, she walked to Bose's bed in a fit of pique. Bugnes couldn't help but laugh. Then, he looked over with interest. "Haha, did you see that? This is the difference between us." Bose grinned and laughed happily. Bugnes curled his lip. "Laugh all you want. It's best if you laugh until your internal organs fall out. Then, you'll know what the difference is." Bose's body stiffened. Then, he carefully looked at his abdomen. That place had been penetrated before. If not for his strong vitality and the fact that he had stuffed it in at that time, he would have died long ago. At this time, the woman put the tray on the bed and bent down to pick up the gauze. Tsk. Bose blinked. Looking at the breasts in front of him, he twisted his body and asked, "Can I ask you a question?" The woman arched her eyebrows in surprise and revealed a puzzled expression. Then, she nodded slightly. "What did you put in here? Such a big, divine vitality fruit? Or a melon?" After half a second of silence, the woman's eyes flashed. Her right hand instantly grabbed a dagger from under the tray. Whoosh, a woo clang. The dagger fell to the ground. The woman subconsciously grabbed at her neck, as if trying to pull out the arrow that was nailed there. Unfortunately, just as she touched it, her body fell onto the bed. Dark red blood instantly soaked the white cotton quilt. Bose raised the crossbow that he had taken out from under the quilt with a look of admiration. "This thing is really not bad. I've decided that in the future, everyone in the police station will have one. Let's wait until you get the funds first." Bugnes's face did not change at all. He smiled lightly. Ever since Bose became the police chief, he had offended most of the nobles in the city. It would be difficult to get the funds now. I've already thought about it. If they don't give it to me, I'll cover my face and become an assassin. Bose reached out to grab the woman's clothes and said casually, "That's a good idea." Bugnes's eyes lit up. He quickly suggested, "Let's start with those few viscounts. Let's wait until you've recovered." At this time, Bose had already grabbed 2 yellow round fruits from the woman's chest. He immediately beamed with joy. "Haha, it's really a melon. Not bad, not bad. You have a good eye. You know that I like to eat this. You want one too?" *CK, you're so disgusting. You have to peel off the skin no matter what. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 270. At night, the drizzle gradually stopped. Tonight, Riva City was extremely quiet, and an indescribable eerie atmosphere filled the air. No one could be seen on the streets, and even the gangsters who liked the nightlife stayed at home obediently. Furthermore, any slightly louder voice would cause a horrified face to appear behind the windows. The chaos that happened during the day had spread throughout the city, and everyone knew that the nobles wouldn't let it go easily. The only difference was that they would take revenge sooner or later. Regardless of whether they had participated or not, they were all waiting with bloodshot eyes, their hearts hanging in the air. The only lively place was the noble residential area in the east of the city. It was still brightly lit, and the parties were still going on. Even so, the young nobles were still talking about what happened during the day in low voices. They cursed at the lowly people who were seeking death, and they guessed what kind of drastic methods their parents would use to take revenge. Oh, it was an interesting topic. At this moment, in a baron's manor, there wasn't any banquet going on here, and most of the buildings had turned off their lighting crystals. Only twice as many guards were yawning and patrolling. Bam! A guard didn't see the iron gate of the arched corridor clearly, and he bumped into it, making a loud noise. Woof! Woof! Dogs immediately barked. Shoo! An older guard comforted the big dog, and then turned his head and whispered, "Be careful. The master is in a bad mood today. If you wake up, you will offend everyone." "Ugh, I'm sorry, Captain. I'm too tired." That guard shivered and straightened his body. Then, he asked in confusion, "What happened to the master? You don't know? Oh, you accompanied the young master out of the city today. Do you know about the riot in the square in the city today?" Seeing that the guard nodded, the older guard continued, "The master happened to pass by this afternoon, and his carriage was smashed, and he was a bit frightened. He just finished discussing with the other nobles, and he came back to rest." "Oh, I understand. Thank you, Captain." The guard looked grateful. "It's okay. Continue patrolling." These guards didn't know that after they passed through the arched door, 3 men in black floated in from above. The big dog beside the door seemed to have sensed something, and it immediately shrank back in fear. It wasn't as fierce as before. The area of the manor could not be considered large. After the 3 black shadows broke through here, they scattered and sneaked into several buildings. A few minutes later, he squatted down on a balcony with several types of flowers and plants. If anyone in the manor saw this scene, they would definitely scream because that was the Baron's bedroom. "Jack, it's up to you." A black shadow opened a small gap in the small window on the side, turned around and said softly, "F***CK, can't you see that I'm carrying something on my back?" The other black shadow was obviously dissatisfied. He gently placed the long object on his back on the ground. There was some light projection, and it could be seen that it was a blanket wrapped around a bed. "Cut the crap. I'm injured. Besides, you're the only one who has that thing." The man in black pointed to the ground and said, "Michaud, you carry him." "Yes, boss." The man in black behind the 2 replied softly, and then picked up the quilt on the ground. Needless to say, the 3 people who silently sneaked into the manor were Tang En, Jack, and Michaud. "Making a friend like you is the biggest mistake in my life. I'll have to compensate you," Jack muttered softly. He took out a dark yellow twig-like item from his chest. Just as he was about to light it up, he paused and took out a blade. He carefully cut off a small part of the twig. When it was lit, the branch immediately emitted spirals of green smoke, and there was an intoxicating fragrance. Jack then threw it into the room through the gap in the window. This thing was called dream incense, and it was a rare plant. As far as it was known, it only grew in the southern rainforest. As for its use, it could calm the mind and let people sleep until dawn. Therefore, this thing was most useful for the old nobles who had insomnia and the mages who meditated. Of course, it was also expensive. After waiting for about 10 minutes, Jack generously used a dagger to forcibly pry open the wooden door on the balcony, which could only be opened from the inside. The room was warm and fragrant, and it was intoxicating. There was no need to talk about the luxurious decorations inside. Tang En and the others went straight to the big bed inside. Lying on the bed was an old man and woman in silk pajamas. They didn't know that there were uninvited guests in the room, and they were still sleeping soundly. TSK, you're already like this, and you're still raising a child outside. Really? You're old but strong. You're our role model. Jack looked at the old baron with gray hair and couldn't help but sigh. At this time, Michaud had already quickly spread out the quilt, and a beautiful woman with a beautiful figure rolled out. However, at this time, her eyes were closed, as if she had been knocked unconscious. Grabbing the beautiful woman's hand, Michaud used a little force and lifted her onto the bed, lifted the silk quilt, and placed it beside the two of them. Too harmonious, too cruel. Jack touched his forehead. Tang En, your move is too vicious. What if the old couple wakes up tomorrow morning? I don't care if he dies. Tang En supported his waist and back, suppressing the faintly painful wound. I was the one who collected the information before. Michaud, who had been silent at the side, suddenly spoke with a look of pity in his eyes. This woman is from a side branch of the Viscount's family. The man used to be a rich businessman, and only after the two of them got married did he have the title of baron. Tang En and Jack opened their mouths and couldn't bear to look at it. This kind of marriage was definitely the woman who held the power. Tomorrow morning, when she found out about her husband's lover, I'm really looking forward to it. Anyway, in the next few days, the baron who firmly supported the purge of the people would not have the time to spare. In that case, Jack stepped forward again, lifted the quilt, and placed the woman between the two of them. He put his hands and feet on the baron's body. Then let's just be straightforward and die quickly. Everything was done. After Jack took some things, the three of them returned the way they came and left the manor. As soon as they arrived outside, most of the members of the Grey Space gathered around with something in their arms. In the eyes of Tang En and Jack, the defense of these aristocratic manors was not very tight. But for the members of the Grey Space, the difficulty was still quite high. So they were only responsible for collecting information and supporting from the periphery. The actual work was still done by the three of them. Let's go to the next one. Which one is the closest? What is it this time? As soon as he finished speaking, a member of the Grey Space handed over a bloody horse head. Baron Bias, the manor is 300 meters away from here. This is his favorite purebred horse. After that, he stuck a long piece of paper in his hand on it. In black and white it said, "Please make a careful decision if you don't want to go to sleep with some other head." Tang En pursed his lips. Jack. Jack trembled and covered his heart. Michaud, come and get it. Oh, Bose's sword energy is really fierce. It makes my little heart still thumping. No, my head is dizzy. After knowing the style of these aristocrats, Tang En and the others naturally couldn't just leave the people to bear the anger. Even if nothing else, if they did that, wouldn't all the hard work they had done in the past few days and today's outbreak be wasted? So they decided to stay and solve this problem. As the saying goes, whoever tied the bell should untie it. Tang En had set his sights on the aristocrats themselves. When they found that their personal safety was not guaranteed, they probably wouldn't think of anything else. In the dark night, Tang En and the others ran around like the most hard-working messengers. That didn't seem right. Messengers could only deliver goods to the door, but now they were delivering goods to the bed. TSK, the conscience of the industry. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 271. No matter how much they prayed or didn't want to, the dawn finally arrived. The next day, the citizens who didn't sleep for the whole night secretly opened their windows and observed the atmosphere of the city. The streets looked brand new after the rain yesterday, the shops with signs but not open yet, the walls were covered with white paper. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Wait, white paper. Bang, 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 the doors opened one by one, and the citizens walked onto the streets one by one, staring at the white paper on the walls in a daze. Of course, they were familiar with the white paper. Except for yesterday, they had been seeing it a lot lately. It was the slogan of the Gray Coat Army. When he turned around, he saw that the streets and alleys were filled with these things. If someone stood on the tallest clock tower in the city, he would find that the white paper was like a white ribbon that wrapped around the city tightly. The citizens looked at the white paper with mixed feelings. They were grateful and resentful at the same time. It was undeniable that the chaos yesterday made them feel good, especially the people who participated in it. This kind of behavior of challenging authority and resisting oppression caused some qualitative changes in their mental state. It was the happiest moment of their lives. When they were old, they could sit on their rocking chairs and proudly tell their children and grandchildren about their heroic deeds. As for resentment, it was understandable. They had been struggling at the bottom of society for their whole lives, and they knew what kind of revenge the nobles would take. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that for a long time in the future, the sky above Riva City would only be covered in black and red. And all of this was caused by the Gray Coat Army. Huh! Someone made the first sound of surprise, and there was a commotion on the street. The citizens gathered around the white paper. There wasn't much to say about the content, and it was still the usual sarcastic criticism. However, there were some obvious words added at the top. Don't worry, we don't use violence, but we don't like being retaliated against. There were so many white papers in Riva City today, and it seemed like the Gray Coat Army had taken out all of their trump cards. Therefore, the words added at the end were very concise, but the meaning was clear. It was a promise that the citizens wouldn't have to worry about being retaliated against by the nobles. The atmosphere instantly calmed down. Although the citizens didn't know how the Gray Coat Army did it, this huge project undoubtedly gave them a lot of confidence. Some places couldn't help but cheer. After a citizen carefully took down the white paper on the wall of his house, the rest of the citizens followed suit and took the white paper into their houses. Riva City, East City, Noble Residential District. What was different from the other districts was that the atmosphere here was particularly strange. It wasn't really quiet, because screams and screams came early in the morning. Then, screams and screams of women's screams and curses. Then, except for a few manners that were still singing sopranos, the male nobles in pajamas were chased out of the door in a sorry state. The other places fell into chaos. All the guards were urgently mobilized to investigate the interior of the manor and even the entire East City district. The nobles, and the nobles, nobles and nobles, TTS come. TTS first, the city gates that were just opened were closed. Then, the citizens saw a bunch of men in plain clothes walking on the streets with bulging bags on their waists. They were everywhere in the city. At first, the citizens were worried that the nobles were here for revenge, but they soon realized that these men were looking for something. They didn't even let go of the dog holes in the walls. The whole city was in chaos. The nobles were indeed frightened. Some of them were still sitting in the living room surrounded by guards. They were trembling as they held their teacups to calm themselves down. They had never felt that their lives were not their own. Imagine, while you were sleeping, someone silently sneaked into your bedroom, and then quietly watched you from the side of the bed, and you were even snoring and having beautiful dreams at that time. They had seen assassins before. There were plenty of them in the Thieves' Guild. However, the official guild was biased towards the nobles. The missions to assassinate the nobles were usually issued by other nobles. Assassins usually wouldn't assassinate the nobles because it would lead to a long, endless pursuit. However, the Gray Coat Army didn't have such concerns. They didn't need a bounty. Moreover, they were natural enemies. There was no guilt in killing them. The nobles had already put the cleansing of the citizens to the back of their minds. They only wanted to catch the Gray Coat Army in the city. In their hearts, they had to admit that if they didn't get rid of these people, they wouldn't dare to do anything to the citizens. At noon, the city's search was still ongoing. Every household was asked to open their doors and search. It seemed like they wouldn't stop until they found something. Under such great efforts, some fugitives who were on the run were found, but they were obviously not their target. At this time, news of what happened in the East District spread throughout the city. Some of the smarter citizens understood that these people were looking for the Grey Coat Army. They couldn't help but worry. It was rare for the nobles to join forces and search the entire city. Could they hide? Everyone knew that as long as the Grey Coat Army wasn't caught, they wouldn't have to worry about revenge. Just as the search was in full swing, a small merchant group gradually approached the city gates. There weren't many people, only a few dozen. There were also more than 10 carriages loaded with goods behind them. These small merchant groups were the most common. What they did was exchange goods between the East and the South. Because of their size, there weren't many goods. Therefore, they needed to transport goods back and forth for a long time to ensure profit. Unfortunately, when they arrived at the city gates, it was already tightly shut. A young man with a small mustache walked out of the merchant group and went forward to negotiate. The city gates are closed. You can't pass through. Go back. A city guard walked over and waved his hand impatiently. One had to know that during this period of time, he had already repeated this sentence countless times. However, before he could finish, a slap landed on the back of his head. A person who looked like a captain nodded and bowed. He spread his hands and made an inviting gesture. "Honorable sir, you may pass through." The young man nodded casually. His slightly immature face had a dignified expression. Creak. The huge city gates slowly opened under the push of more than 10 soldiers on both sides. With a wave of his hand, the small merchant group passed through under the leadership of the young man. At the side, the city guard looked aggrieved. "Captain, didn't the city lord order the city gates to be closed? Why can they, smack?" The captain slapped the city guard's head again. "Idiot, look at their flag!" The city guard was stunned. He looked up at the flag on the carriage. On the square cloth, there was an animal with pointed ears, 4 claws, and a curved tail. A cold wind blew, and the flag fluttered. The animal on it seemed to be alive and running. This is a cat?" After confirming that he didn't see wrongly, the city guard opened his mouth and was stunned. The flag was the symbol of a force. There could be plants, weapons, magical beasts, hybrid magical beasts, and so on. However, there weren't many ordinary animals. Even so, they would choose fierce and big animals like wolves and lions. However, a cat. This was too out of place. To be precise, it's a civet cat. The captain looked at the merchant group enviously and shook his head. "I don't know how much money they've earned. Even the city lord has to suck up to them." The city guard finally reacted after hearing the captain's words. He shouted, "Yatong merchant group." Since they were guarding the city, they had to have good eyesight. Otherwise, if they accidentally offended a noble, no one would care even if they were beaten to death. Of course, the city guard's eyesight was good. He didn't pay attention to the small merchant group just now. Now that he knew that the merchant group was the Yatong merchant group, which had been popular among the nobles recently, he broke out in a cold sweat. If he offended them, he would offend all the nobles in the city. When the city walls of Riva became a blurry black dot, the Yatong merchant group stopped at a fork in the road. The young man was naturally Alan. He took a few steps back and raised his hand to knock on the closed carriage a few times. Knock, 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 bang. The carriage door opened. Tang En walked out with Michaud's help. His face was pale. "Thank you, Alan." After saying that, Tang En narrowed his eyes and looked at the members of the business group not far away. "Don't worry, sir. They're reliable," Alan said immediately. Tang En nodded. Josiah, Jack, and the others walked out of the carriage one by one. In the eyes of the Bran Empire, the Grey Coat Army was definitely a force to be eliminated. Even some of the nobles would be punished if they were found to have dealings with the Grey Coat Army, let alone the Yatong merchant group. Tang En and the others had escaped with the help of the merchant group. Naturally, they didn't want outsiders to know. Here. Tang took out a few pieces of white paper and massaged his tired eyebrows. This is something I thought of last night. I don't know if it's useful. Take it and let the professionals study it. No matter how popular a product was, there would always be a limit. After all, there were only so many people who would buy it. The hot sales of the washing machine had shown Tang the power of technology, so he had spent the night recalling some things from the modern world. Of course, it was possible that he was not acclimatized, but it could be used as a reference. Alan pursed his lips and took the pieces of paper solemnly. Of course, he knew who came up with the idea of the washing machine. Although Tang said that he didn't care, who knew if there was a washing machine among these thin pieces of paper? Sir, take this. After Alan put away the paper, he took off a ring on his finger and handed it over. This is a symbol of the Yatong Merchant Group. I will set up Yatong shops in the nearby cities. You can come here and withdraw some money. Hiss. Jack's eyes lit up. He licked his lips and almost drooled. Although Alan said it casually, Jack knew the meaning behind it. It could be said that with this ring, it was equivalent to having a treasury. Alan now knew that Tang had joined the Grey Coat Army. Although he couldn't understand it, he still supported the things that Tang did unconditionally. Since he couldn't help him on the surface, he could only give him gold coins. Tang also understood this point. He didn't refuse and accepted the seemingly inconspicuous ring. Oh right, bring those people to the south and help them do some business or something. Tang pointed at the cowering hotel owner and a few waiters behind him. The hotel owner had been depressed recently. He thought that he had gotten a big deal, but who knew that it would be a jinx? Not only was the hotel sealed, but he had also been in a state of anxiety for the past few days. After all, in the outside world, he had been labeled as a secret accomplice of the Grey Coat Army. It was impossible for him not to complain about it. However, after seeing what Tang and the others did, the hotel owner could only slap himself in his heart. Who asked you to be so greedy and cover for them? However, now that he saw Tang's finger pointing at him, and Alan nodding in realization, the hotel owner felt relieved. The haze in the hotel owner's heart disappeared, and he was filled with joy. He was a businessman, so he naturally knew the importance of the Yatong business group. Aha, I'm rich. The Grey Coat Army came at the right time. Yes, of course, I have good taste too. Alright, that's all. After chatting for a while, Tang ended the conversation. They were only about 10 miles away from Riva City. No one could be sure that the nobles wouldn't come after them after they realized what was going on, so it was better to split up for now. Yes. Alan nodded silently. Then, he seemed to have thought of something. He raised his head and said, Sir, Sister Lena has been missing you. Tang paused and touched his nose. Tell her not to worry. Yes, I'll go to the south if I have the chance. Okay, Alan replied. He bowed and said, Goodbye, sir. Goodbye. Tang turned around and walked a few steps. Then, he touched his forehead and said, Jack, are you coming with us or with the business group? Of course, I'm going with the business group. Jack turned around without hesitation and said with disdain, Nothing good will come out of following you. I want to live for a few more years. Jack walked up to Alan and immediately changed his expression. He stared at the other ring on Alan's finger and said, Hey, Alan, we're from the same hometown. Actually, Tang and I have a good relationship. You see. Alan opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. F***ck. Tang's mouth twitched a few times. He got into the carriage with Josiah and the rest and left. After watching the carriage disappear at the foot of a mountain, Alan sighed in disappointment. He turned around and said with a dignified expression, I hope you will never forget what happened today. He didn't mean it as a threat, but it was definitely resolute and decisive. Yes. The members of the business group bowed and answered. Alan nodded. They were all veterans of the business group. They knew what was important and what was important. Moreover, there were benefits to knowing some secrets of leadership. After such a long period of experience, Tang En was no longer the rookie assassin he used to be. And Alan was no longer the teenager who delivered newspapers in the slums. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 272. It was probably late autumn. 2 rows of parasol trees extended along the road into the distance. Soft golden light passed through the gaps between the branches and sprinkled on the yellowed leaves on the ground, reflecting a warm color. Under a tree there was a row of benches. An old man reclined in the most comfortable way. The book in his hand seemed to understand the mind of the person. After a while, it would flutter without wind. There was no doubt that this was not the real world. The 100,000 mountains gathered almost all the landforms in the world, but most of them were barren hills and unruly rivers. The picturesque scenery in front of him was basically non-existent. Tang En and the others were now sitting in a carriage heading to the station. Since he had nothing to do and the feeling of being injured was not good, he simply closed his eyes and entered the space. Rustle, 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 Tang En stepped on the leaves as if he was walking on clouds. He looked around inexplicably and finally curled his lip. Old butler, do you have to be so cultured? People with barren hearts always think that other people's hearts are also barren mountains. The old butler did not raise his head. He seemed to be answering, but it was more like he was reading a sentence from a book. Tang En was stunned for a moment and became angry. I'm cultured? Back then, I went to the library for love. The aesthetic works I read were as tall as a person. TSK, although the girl ran away in the end, I still kept my eyes that discovered beauty. He blabbered a lot, but the old butler seemed to be disdainful of talking to him. He flipped to the next page as if there was no one else. Tang En asked for a rebuff. He just took it as a tacit agreement. He sat on the leaves and pulled open the assassin panel. To be honest, he had not properly observed his panel for a while. It was not that he did not pay attention, but there were only so many commonly used skills. He was now planning to push those skills to the highest level. First of all, his experience points had not changed much. 3,800. There was still a long way to go before the next upgrade of 5,000. His blood chi had increased a lot. It was now at 14,000. The next upgrade was 20,000. It was still far away. However, under normal circumstances, this amount of blood chi was definitely enough. In fact, he rarely used blood chi now unless he was fighting with an expert. Because with his attainments in the dagger, it was more than enough. In terms of blood chi special effects, 5 times increase, advanced deterrence, advanced defense penetration, intermediate explosion, elementary internal invasion. It could be said that Tang En was paying more attention to special effects than anything else, because this was his greatest asset when competing with Do Chi and magic. In the battle against Bows and the Bugnis in Riva City, if it weren't for his 5-fold amplification and advanced armor break, he wouldn't have been able to break through their combat energy armor. His title was still the evil dog nemesis. How should he put it? It was better than nothing. They had indeed given some help before, but with Tang En's current strength, what watchdog could stop him? Actually, Tang En was rather looking forward to the title system, which had been created separately. However, there really wasn't any fixed path to success in this aspect. It was completely dependent on luck. Now, he finally understood why the old butler had said that it was difficult to obtain a system title when he had obtained the Hound Nemesis. This was a blatant challenge to his character. Next was the skill tree. Skills were ranked from low to high: beginner, basic, proficient, expert, transcendent, master, grandmaster in terms of layout, wilderness survival skills, proficient. Peep and grasp. Thousands of things, nowhere to hide. Skill duration: 8 minutes, cooldown time, 20 minutes, cost 800 blood energy. There weren't many skills in the layout skill tree, but in terms of wilderness survival skills, it was all-encompassing. It was the reason why Tang En was able to carve the killer habit into his bones. Another thing that needed to be mentioned was that the layout also gave Tang En a new way of thinking. Now, although he was still not good at large-scale deployment as usual, his control of small situations was extremely precise. This could be seen from the control he had over Boza's cavalry in Riva City. Of course, there was still a long way to go before he could reach the level that the old butler had mentioned, where he could kill people with his layout alone. In terms of concealment, basic stealth, proficient. Haste, talent skill, cannot be leveled up. Traverse 10 feet in one breath. Skill duration, 10 seconds, cooldown time, 1 minute, cost 100 blood energy. Phantom, proficient, can be leveled up. Once activated, his figure will transform into thousands of phantoms. Skill duration, 3 minutes, cooldown time, 10 minutes, cost 600 blood energy. Shadow invisibility, beginner. Turn invisible, wander in the shadows. Skill duration, 1 minute, cooldown time, 5 minutes, cost 500 blood energy. Concealment was an assassin's specialty, and it was one of these skills. Haste, needless to say, was a talent skill that Tang En had long since acquired. However, it wasn't very useful now. It was either used for traveling. Otherwise, it could be used together with other skills to burst out in a short period of time. Phantom, on the other hand, was a skill that Tang En often used in battle. It was very confusing and very practical. Now, it had been leveled up to proficient. As for shadow invisibility, it was something that Tang En had recently learned. He used it on the rainy day when he fought against bows. Tang En still didn't have a clue about this skill. The old butler had always said that it would be fine as long as he experienced the feeling of nothingness, but did he have to be so vague and vague? Couldn't he be more practical? In terms of disguise, basic disguise, proficient. Bone shrinking skill, proficient. 1,000 faces, normal skill, not learned. The disguise item that Tang En was making now could be said to be the most coveted item for assassins and thieves in Otherworld. According to Jack, this was the craft of making a fortune. Tang En used the bone shrinking skill very smoothly. Although he couldn't easily turn into a child like the old butler, it wasn't a problem for him to turn into an ordinary dwarf. Moreover, this skill wasn't only suitable for disguise. It could also be used to turn danger into safety in battle. As for 1,000 faces, it was one of the few skills that Tang En could learn but didn't practice. The bone shrinking skill changed the bones of the body, while 1,000 faces could change the face and head. When it was fully mastered, he could instantly turn into a complete stranger, just like the face changing in the Sichuan opera of the future. However, Tang En already had the ability to make disguise items, so he didn't spend any time practicing it. Of course, there was the most important point. This was a complicated brain that could change parts. It wasn't like the body that could be changed with a click. Danger, pain, and so on made people shudder. Moreover, even if he mastered it in the space, Tang En might not dare to use it in the real world. After all, if he wasn't careful, there was a high chance that he would become cerebral palsy. Killing skills, basic. Long and short bow, proficient. Dagger, transformative stage. Random flowers, proficient. The dance of the dagger, the blooming of the bloody flower. Cooldown time, 30 seconds. Consumes 900 blood chi. Empty kill, proficient. The moment the assassination target raised his head, the Grim Reaper's scythe descended. Cooldown time, 1 minute. Consumes 1,000 blood chi. Storm mastered. Unbridled whirlwind and thunder, violent cleansing of the universe. Cooldown time, 1 hour. Consumes 2,000 blood chi. Dagger was Tang En's most commonly used attack method, and he practiced it the most. Therefore, among all the basic skills, Dagger was the highest level, reaching transformative stage. Random flowers and empty kill were also very handy for him now. When he encountered a strong enemy, he basically relied on them to support the situation. Tang En loved and hated Storm at the same time. He loved it because it was indeed a powerful attack method, and under certain circumstances, it could even turn the situation of a battle. As for his hatred, it was not only because this move hurt others and hurt himself, but also because every time Tang En used this skill, it meant that he had to take a stroll on the edge of death. In fact, this was exactly the case. He used it a total of 5 times. The first time was when he had just learned it, but before he could successfully use it, it was casually broken by Xiao Weian. The second time was when he forcefully saved a little girl from a rain of arrows in the valley, and as a result, he vomited blood and returned. The third time was when he faced the terrifying stinger of a killer bee, and he had to flee in a sorry state with several needles in his body. The fourth time was when he faced a pincer attack from many soldiers while fleeing from the grasslands, and the result was internal and external injuries, and he was unconscious for 2 days and 2 nights. The fifth time was not long ago, when he faced a sneak attack from Borg's group at the original base, and in the end, he was seriously injured again. This was not a powerful skill, but a portable trigger bomb. Status: Heart like still water. Talent: skill cannot be upgraded. Allows the body to quickly recover calm, immune to most negative statuses. Skill duration: 30 minutes. Cooldown time: 3 hours. Consumes 100 blood chi. Killing intent: proficient. Killer's will: the target's nightmare, can be used to deter and track. Consumes 30 blood chi per second. Ghost body can be upgraded. Holding the Shura weapon, crush 3000 killing field. Skill duration: 5 minutes. Consumes 3000 blood chi. Obliterate conscience. Normal skill, not learned. Status: this was the skill tree that the old butler had the highest evaluation. However, Tang En did not think much of it, and even faintly feared it. Heart like still water, needless to say, was the first talent skill that Tang En had obtained, but later on, it became completely useless. Tang En's hands were already stained with blood, and he had killed people like scything flax, so he did not need it to adjust his emotions. Killing intent: this was the skill that Tang En did not dislike the least in the status skill tree, although it also seemed to be useless. This was because it could only be used against targets with low strength. Ghost body. TSK. Tang En was wary of this skill. So far, he had only used it once, and after watching the movie-like replay, he did not hesitate to throw it into the cold palace. It was not that this skill was not powerful, but on the contrary, after using Ghost Body, all of his statuses were almost doubled. However, during this process, Tang En could not control himself at all. If he did something wrong, it would be too late to regret it. Moreover, the sequela of this skill was quite serious. For some reason, when Tang En skimmed through this skill, he seemed to notice that the color of the 2 words, Ghost Body, seemed to have darkened. Obliterate conscience. This was a skill that could be used with 10,000 blood chi. It did not need to be learned. Tang En had now met the requirements, but he did not dare to use it. After being taught a lesson by Ghost Body, he had carefully consulted the old butler about it. The other party's answer was also very indifferent. This can make you the purest killer. Of course, this kind of specious answer did not satisfy Tang En. After some more pestering, the old butler finally became impatient and threw out a sentence. It is to subtly change your personality and turn you into a killing machine. What? Tang En was speechless at that moment, although he did not believe that a skill could affect his personality, which could only be changed by his own subjective will. In the end, he still did not have the courage to try. A killing machine. That was to never know fatigue, to always raise the hand and slash the knife, and to do it without blinking. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 273. Phew. After looking through it all, Tang An could not help but feel a little emotional. It turned out that unknowingly, he had learned so many things to kill people. Some of the skills here were gradually upgraded to become powerful, while some were constantly degraded to become useless. Of course, there were also some that he dared not touch. As his experience increased, he became more familiar with the system. Tang En now vaguely felt the purpose of this assassin system. To put it bluntly, the system was focused on cultivating the host to become an assassin. As for whether the host would become a machine or a psychopath, it did not care. This was also the reason why Tang En was choosing his skills carefully. Since it was inevitable that he would become an assassin, he would rather improve slowly and eventually become a top assassin. He did not want to improve overnight only to become an unconscious machine that only knew how to kill people. Tang En blinked to make sure that he did not read the data on the interface wrongly. He turned his head and asked, "Old butler, why is the blood chi consumed by the skills changing?" Since joining the Grey Coat Army, Tang En had killed many people. His blood chi had increased rapidly, so he did not realize that the blood chi consumed by the skills was constantly increasing. For example, blood chi enhancement used to consume 5 blood chi points per second, but now it had become 25 blood chi points per second. The old butler closed the book and looked at him as if he was an idiot. Are you kidding? Since the skill level has increased, the blood chi consumed will naturally increase. Tang En was stunned and could not help but slap his head. This was indeed a stupid question. It was just like when a product was upgraded, the price would naturally be more expensive. But then wouldn't my 14,000 blood chi points not be enough? After realizing this problem, Tang En suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. He thought of something else. If the battle in the past dragged on for a long time and then suddenly ran out of blood chi would automatically replenish itself in the wee hours of the morning. In addition, Tang En was an assassin and always acted quickly, so he had not carefully planned a battle for a long time. He was lucky that he didn't encounter the awkward situation where he suddenly ran out of blood chi in the middle of a battle. Otherwise, he would have died because of this. *CK. I have to pay attention to this, I have to pay attention to it. Tang En wiped the sweat on his forehead and kept reminding himself. Looking at the old butler's mocking gaze, Tang En rubbed his nose and wisely changed the topic. By the way, old butler, did you discover anything about the Phantom Moon Mantra? As long as Tang En obtained a book, his first reaction would be to record it into the space. The Phantom Moon art was no exception. What an interesting cultivation method! The old butler waved his hand, and the illusory moon art appeared in his hand. The people of this world don't know much about the insides of the body, and they keep it a secret. However, it is also a unique way to form a complete external cultivation system. Tang En asked, "So, this kind of cultivation method is very ordinary? Why do you say that?" It's definitely better on the inside than on the outside," Twain said without hesitation. He had read novels and movies before. In those novels, the skinny old man who practiced internal martial arts could easily defeat a muscular man. The old butler revealed a rare expression of strong indifference and curled his lips. "Inner strength isn't that amazing, at least from what you saw. This world isn't the one you were in before. There are some things in this space that are suitable for cultivating do chi." His body shook. Tang En didn't pay attention to the old butler's words and said with a trembling voice, You know about inner strength? Is it very strange?" The old butler calmly looked at him. There's no harm in saying more. Not only do I know about inner strength, I also have it. Ah? Teach me, old butler, teach me, Tang En said excitedly. For someone who grew up watching wuxia dramas, this was indeed very attractive. Didn't you hear it just now? This place is suitable for do chi. The old butler shook his head. Speaking of inner strength, you are already too old. At this point, the old butler revealed a smile, as if he was reminiscing about something. If you want to cultivate true inner strength, you have to start from a very young age. However, how can such a young child have that kind of thinking? So most of them will miss some opportunities. Age again. Tang En scratched his head. He even had thoughts of going back to the furnace to be reborn. So Do-Chi, magic, and inner strength were all too late? God, since you let me transmigrate, why can't I transmigrate into a child's body? Alright, let's not talk about this. The old butler collected his expression and calmed down again. Blood chi is also not bad. Actually, you should be glad that you can obtain this kind of acquired but powerful thing. Tang En nodded and cheered himself up. It was useless to think too much. One shouldn't be too greedy. He already had a bright future with his blood chi. This was already a very good result. Oh right. The old butler reversed the illusory moon spell and pointed at the damaged page. This should have been torn off by someone not long ago. What? Tang En was stunned and shocked. Tang En remembered that the auctioneer had clearly said that when a group of adventurers found this mental cultivation method in the ruins of the ancient city, the back was already damaged. Could it be a scam? No. Tang En quickly rejected this idea. If the back was intact, the auction house wouldn't sell it at all. That group of adventurers. Tang En quickly confirmed the suspect. This was the most likely situation. If the other party was an Earth stage warrior, there was no need to look at the front content. They only needed to refer to the back. However, thinking of this, Tang En couldn't help but feel a little discouraged. This was because when the auction house accepted something, they wouldn't ask for the other party's name at all. And the other party only needed to wear a mask to cover everything. I'll find time to check. No matter what, Tang En made up his mind. It was fine if he didn't know about this matter, but since he knew, there was no reason to give up so easily. The old butler saw that Tang En was lost in thought and didn't pay attention to him. He reached out and tapped on a screen. This is the next stage of little Carol's training plan. Tang En gathered his thoughts and looked up at the well-organized plan. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and say meaningfully, "Old butler, you seem to value little Carol a lot." It was undeniable that what flashed through his mind now was indeed something like Grandpa Chow and the little Loli. Naturally, there was a basis for thinking like this, because little Carol's training plan was also planned by the old butler. However, he could joke like this because Tang En's relationship with the old butler was not as stiff as before. The system was the system, and the old butler was the old butler. Tang En had previously blamed the old butler for the infuriating missions issued by the system. Now that he vaguely understood the relationship between them, he naturally eased up. The old butler didn't seem to understand the meaning of the words, or he heard it but was too lazy to pay attention. Little Carol has great talent. I can be patient with you, so why can't I value her? Revenge. This is undisguised revenge. This clearly meant that his talent was not as good as little Carol's. Tang En decided to fight back. Then why don't I see you being so concerned about the other members of the gray space? The old butler calmly glanced at Tang En. Wasn't I the one who gave you their training plan? Tang En touched his nose and wanted to say that it wasn't like that. There was obviously a big difference in the level of detail between the former and the latter's plans. However, he had already taken someone else's things for free, and now he was blaming the other party for not being generous enough. How could he say such shameless words? Actually, I'm also a little curious, the old butler continued. Why haven't you taught them yet? Tang En opened his mouth in surprise. Teach them what? Skills. Although they don't have the help of blood energy, why don't you teach them some skills that can be done by hand? Don't forget, they also have fighting energy. Tang En opened his mouth and stood there in a daze. The old butler's indifferent words were like a bell ringing in his mind. Yes, why don't you teach them? Things like ghost body and peeping couldn't be taught, but some skills like chaotic flower, air kill, storm, etc. that could be learned by hand and body coordination, why don't you teach them? Most of the members of the gray space had fighting energy. Although there weren't so many special effects, they couldn't reach the effect that Tang Yen could use. However, fighting energy itself was a kind of power, representing a special effect. Of course, there was no problem at all in learning skills. Tang Yen's mind was a little confused for a moment, and he couldn't come back to his senses. The reason for this was actually easy to understand. There was only one assassin system space, and the two sides cultivated completely different systems. Therefore, Tang Yen didn't realize that others could also learn system skills. So you really didn't think of it? The old butler looked over faintly and sighed with a more meaningful attitude than Tang Yen just now. The tone was dull and meaningful, and the words stopped there. However, the contempt, ridicule, and other negative meanings contained in it made Tang Yen want to vomit blood. This was the real naked revenge. Oh no, this was a two-hit combo. With a red face, Tang Yen began to argue unreasonably. You didn't say this. You didn't ask either. Also, I thought you knew. Thought you knew. This time it contained regret, disappointment. Okay, this was a three-hit combo. I suddenly need to pee, I'll go first. Tang Yen decisively used the pee escape method, and was about to silently exit the system. Oh right. At this moment, the old butler suddenly said, collect more fighting energy cultivation methods in the future. For what? Tang Yen put down his right hand that was about to bow and asked curiously. Participate in it. When you have nothing to do, think about the fighting energy circulation channel. The old butler said it very casually, but in Tang Yen's ears, it was undoubtedly a wonderful sound, and he was overjoyed. He also knew a few fighting energy circulation channels, which were obtained by Bess after a series of perverted experiments. Its value was needless to say. Its practicality was absolute, which could be seen from the soaring fighting energy cultivation of David and the others. Now the old butler said that he wanted to continue this work. Although it was just a matter of thinking about it, Tang Yen, who was familiar with the old butler's character, naturally knew what this meant. It was almost a done deal. Okay, no problem. Even if I have to snatch it, I'll snatch a basket for you. Tang Yen's tone was very resolute and decisive, and then he bowed. Thank you, old butler. The old butler shook his head lightly. No need in this way, presumably someone won't say that he doesn't care about others. Tang Yen opened his mouth. A 4-hit combo. Was it? An absolute 4-hit combo. I'm going to pee. With a whoosh, Twain's figure turned into nothingness, and he disappeared directly from the space. Pain? That was nothing. Compared to the old butler's plain words, which made people vomit blood, this was trash. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 274. This year's winter in Bran was especially long, although the temperature had dropped from the coldest point in the year. But from time to time, the cold wind and cold rain told the world that spring was still far away. Not only the weather, but the people in the north also felt a chill in their hearts. This kind of worry mainly came from the front line. In the past 2 months, the battle that happened there was basically known to everyone. The northern wilderness tribes' attack this time was obviously not like the previous year's attack, where they would leave after plundering some food. Starting from the first checkpoint, they quickly advanced. Relying on their strong military force, they quickly took down some of the checkpoints and small towns. For these towns, the barbarians in the past would usually just destroy them after plundering them. But now they sent people to defend and even captured people to build high walls. The occupied areas were linked together to form a semicircle. At this time, everyone knew that the barbarians were planning something big. This situation had escalated to an official war between the two countries. Naturally, this kind of war had happened before, and it was not short. The longest recorded war was more than 10 years ago. That war lasted for more than 3 years. The two sides fought in the north for a long time, and blood flowed like rivers. In the end, it ended with the northern wilderness tribes suddenly retreating. Later, the people in Bran found out that it was because the northern wilderness's royal family, the Celestial Wolf tribe, had passed away. The people did not know how long this war would last, but one thing was for sure. Their following days would be more difficult and dangerous. Of course, this news had little to do with Tang En, who was about to arrive at the camp. The few carriages traveled on the winding mountain roads for 2.5 days. Tang En finally endured the initial itchiness of the wound healing. Next, it was a matter of resting for a few days. Twain's current situation was undoubtedly much better than Bo's and the others, who were staying in the treatment center. The other party was still constantly changing the gauze, looking at the wound, and counting with his fingers the date of his discharge. If Tang En's abnormal body constitution was not the main reason for this, it was mainly because of his blood. Bo's domineering fighting aura entered his body, but it was neutralized by his consumed blood and qi in just a moment. However, Tang En's blood qi had invaded their bodies, and that had harmed Bo's and the others. This thing could only be forced out of the body with do qi, but once the do qi was used, the external gauze would burst open, and then the wound that had just healed would also burst open. The treatment that Bo's and the others had undergone for the past few days was simply like going back and forth in purgatory. It was so painful that they wished they were dead. David looked at the familiar mountain range and turned to ask, "We should be there after this mountain, right?" "Yes." Michaud nodded and steered the horse around the stones in the road. The mountain road was rugged, and the stones that rolled down from time to time made it very inconvenient for the carriage to travel. David sighed when he heard that. "It's a pity that my subordinates haven't trained enough yet." "Ha ha!" Michaud suddenly chuckled and curled his lip. "There's no point in training." "What the hell do you mean?" David roared at Michaud's face. "Nothing. Our team won yesterday's competition," Michaud said casually. "We won yesterday's competition." "Bah! How dare you say that?" David's veins were bulging on his forehead. He turned his head disdainfully and said, "You're just stepping on dog shit. We encountered a lot of bandits. Luck is also a kind of strength. But I also understand that losers like to find all kinds of excuses to hide their incompetence." "Michaud, you bastard." "My bastard died a long time ago." Listening to the constant cursing outside, Joshua, who was in the car, blinked a little uneasily. "Done, will this be okay? Will they fight?" Tang En, who was resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and smiled. "Don't worry, they won't. Besides, it's not a bad thing to fight." Josiah slightly opened his mouth and frowned. "You're their boss. How can you say that? Healthy competition is not a bad thing." Tang En explained, "It's not like you don't know David's character. Didn't he say that he wanted to cut off all ties with Michaud yesterday? Didn't he take the initiative today?" "Oh, you're right." Josiah pursed his lips. Thinking of David's anger yesterday, he couldn't help but laugh. The battle in Riva City was the first time that the Gray Space Squad used teamwork in a real battle. The result was pretty good, and it was a small test. After leaving the city, Tang En took the opportunity to divide the new members into 2 teams. They were officially under the command of David and Michaud. The new team naturally needed to work together and find their own place in the team. It just so happened that they were now in the 100,000 Mountains, where the mountain roads were long and there were countless bandits. It was an excellent place to sharpen their weapons. Therefore, Tang En ordered the 2 teams to take turns to wipe out the bandit. As for the winner, it was very simple. It was to see which team killed more bandits. With the mountain roads as an important transportation route, the bandits on both sides were naturally endless. However, there were also large and small bandit groups, and some of them even built their own strongholds. David's team was very unlucky. They encountered a few big bandits. With such a large group of bandits, it was naturally impossible for a dozen people to take them down. Moreover, even if they killed the sentries, there was a high possibility that the bandits would catch up with them. In the end, they had to retreat. Michaud's team was much luckier. When it was their turn to investigate, there were only a few small bandits in front of them. After clearing the sentries, they hid and surrounded the bandit. Then, they picked up their crossbows and shot. After chatting for a while, Josiah suddenly said firmly, "Tang, when we go back, I will persuade Aunt Rosa to continue the city promotion plan." "Okay. That's it?" Josiah pursed his lips and said discontentedly, "Don't you have any suggestions?" "I agree." Tang spread his hands. "The Gray Coat Army's foundation is very solid. Now that they are implementing the city promotion plan, it is also in line with the times, so I have no suggestions." Josiah nodded and said decisively, "Okay, then let's do it." TSK, she had indeed changed. Tang raised his eyebrows and praised in his heart. Josiah's personality had never lacked decisiveness and persistence. However, it was limited to experience. In the past, she was still a little weak and immature. But after directly leading the people of Riva City in a riot, she had undoubtedly gone through a baptism. In that kind of environment, Twain could not bring himself to publicize it in public. Even many people, including Tang, would not agree to do so, because it was very likely that it would be meaningless. It was very likely that they would be arrested on the street. It was even very likely that it would cause a backlash. All kinds of concerns, all kinds of reasons, all kinds of cowardice. Fear of failure and fear of being strong was a part of human nature. But there would always be such a kind of person who would go against the flow of the general trend and stubbornly move forward. Whether it was intentional or unintentional, the obstacles around them, the irresistible force in front of them. But all of these could not stop the people with their heads held high from taking a firm step forward. So what if it was ineffective? So what if shouting could not wake up the people around them? The matter was there. Someone had to do it, even if it was just an attitude. Tang never lacked confidence in Josiah, but some things really needed time and opportunity to grow and change. Just like the previous election of Josiah as the hero of the Gray Coat Army. This was a sudden idea that came to Tang at that time. He naturally thought highly of Josiah, but he thought that she still needed some experience to be truly competent. But now, this opportunity had come, and Josiah had seized it. No matter how coincidental or lucky it was, there was only one important point. She had made a choice and succeeded. Tang. Josiah's cheeks were somewhat red. She stretched out her jade-like hand and waved it in front of Tang. Tang retracted his gaze and was slightly surprised. "What's wrong?" "No, nothing." Josiah curved her lips and smiled. Then, she turned her head and pinched the front of her clothes with her left hand. "What's wrong?" After looking at her for so long, she still asked what's wrong at this time. Tang also realized this problem. Suddenly, he touched his nose a little awkwardly. "It's not easy to explain. Should I say sorry and that I was in a daze just now?" Even if there was a screw loose in the brain, he would know that he could not say that. Although the atmosphere was somewhat strange, fortunately, there were two people who were still arguing outside, so there was no awkward silence. "Damn it, get out of the car and let's fight one-on-one. See if I don't chop you to death with my whirlwind slash." David was obviously not good at talking. In his anger, he decided to fight. Who's afraid of who? But are you sure you've mastered whirlwind slash, and not dizzy yourself? Why do you care so much? Just fight. David's tone was obviously a strong one. Then forget it. Haha, you don't dare, right? Yeah, I'm really afraid. I'm afraid that you'll accidentally hurt others. Haha. Waff, when Tangan heard this, he could not help but chuckle. The so-called whirlwind slash was actually a simplified version of the storm skill. After being awakened by the old butler, Tang En first taught the system skills to David and Michaud. Michaud was easy to deal with. He also used a dagger, so he just had to repeat what the old butler taught him at the time. David, on the other hand, was not easy to deal with. The attack style of a greatsword and a dagger were completely different. After thinking for a while, Tang En decided to adapt the system skills. Originally, he just wanted to try it out, but unexpectedly it was really effective. The Moist Storm skill was the first to be successfully adapted. However, the name Whirlwind Slash was not given by Tang En. At that time, he thought of Blade Storm. However, David felt that it was a mouthful and did not have enough momentum, so he changed it to the vulgar Whirlwind Slash. The argument continued. Just as Josiah felt that David and Michaud were going overboard and was about to persuade them to stop, the outside suddenly became quiet. Tang En's ears twitched and he raised his eyebrows. As expected, the car door opened and David's large head appeared. Boss, someone is here to welcome us. We've arrived at the base. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 275. In fact, it was more like they were on guard than welcoming them. The carriage stopped in the middle of the mountain range. Through the door, Tang En could see a few soldiers in light armor walking down the hill in the distance. In the forest at the top of the mountain, he could faintly see the reflection of blades. Of course, they were not bandits. After all, no bandits would be stupid enough to take the initiative to appear from such a distance. Michaud jumped out of the carriage and went forward to talk to them. After a while, he returned. Boss, they are the scouts of the 4th Army. They were ordered to monitor this area. The 4th Army? Tang En was a little surprised. Of course, he knew about the military organization of the Grey Coat Army. To be honest, the organization was a little chaotic. For example, it was normal for there to be a difference of hundreds of people between regiments. For example, there were no battalions under the regiment. It was also possible to jump directly to a brigade. But no matter what, as far as he knew, there was only one army in the Grey Coat Army, and it was under the command of the old General O Meng. Where did the 4th Army come from? Michaud had always been meticulous. Obviously, he had asked this question before. He said, I heard that because more brothers have joined recently, the military organization has been reorganized. Now there are a total of 4 armies. Tang En asked casually, how many people are in an army? Michaud's expression was a little strange. 10,000, what, 10,000? David's eyes widened and he was tongue-tied. How many? Tang En was also shocked and cried out involuntarily. It was no wonder that they were so shocked. Even Josiah, who didn't understand much, was a little confused. He counted silently with his fingers. If one army was 10,000 people, then wouldn't the 4 armies be more than 40,000 people? One had to know that when they set out from the station, the number of people had just returned to the standard before they were hunted down, 25,000. But in just 10 days, they had increased the number of soldiers by 15,000? What the F***ck is this? And this was the result of the promotion in the villages. If they spread it to the cities later. Josiah's mind was a little messy, and his thoughts were a little messy. However, there was one thing that she was sure of, and that was that spring seemed to be coming for the Grey Coat Army. The future was bright. After being stunned for a long time, Tang En was the first to come back to his senses. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled, calming his shaken heart. Although this result was unexpected, it was actually within reason. Most of the lords and knights were warriors who had performed meritorious deeds. After they retired, they were conferred titles by the empire and lords. This kind of title could not be inherited. It was a one-time deal. Therefore, after they took control of a place, what they did was to constantly plunder and accumulate wealth. Correspondingly, the people in the villages and towns were naturally the most oppressed. Now that they saw a resistance organization, they naturally joined in. Tang En rubbed his nose and sighed. From a certain point of view, the rule of the nobles in the empire was going downhill, even without the Grey Coat Army. In the long run, there would also be Green Coat Army, Red Coat Army, and other similar organizations that would constantly rise up to resist. But no matter what, judging from the current situation, the Grey Coat Army's recruitment speed was truly frightening. With this kind of inexplicable shock in his heart, Tang En's carriage set off again. Along the way, there were still many scouts coming out to check. The storm caused by Tang En and the others killing a large number of lords and knights had not yet passed. In addition, the military supplies were constantly being looted. The lord's soldiers were still outside, constantly clearing out the bandits and bandit. The Grey Coat Army was now in a period of rapid development. Naturally, they could not let these things affect the overall situation. Therefore, even though they were more than 10 miles away from the encampment, there were still a large number of scouts spread out to keep watch. After half an hour of walking and stopping, Tang En and the others went around the mountain range and turned into a hidden path. When they came out, the buildings in the distance came into view. First, there was a black-gray city wall that stretched for several miles. Although it could be seen from the corners and gaps at the top that many had not yet been repaired, this did not affect its majestic appearance at all. On the contrary, because of the ant-like figures on top, it looked even more majestic and tall. The pale white sunlight, the dark metallic luster, and the city gate that was wide open in the middle. In the eyes of Tang En and the others, this was not a city wall. It was clearly an ancient giant beast that was crawling, and it was even opening its mouth. Josiah, David, and the others raised their heads and looked into the distance in a daze. For a moment they were stunned on the spot. Tang En's feelings were even more complicated. As a modern person, he was used to seeing all kinds of extraordinary and creative reinforced concrete buildings. After transmigrating to a different world, he had also seen many exquisite and gorgeous noble manors and castles. He had thought that he was already considered experienced, but this unfinished city that was purely for military purposes still shocked him inexplicably. There was even a faint sense of awe. Such a huge thing was actually completed by a group of insignificant human beings? From the moment this city was built, it was destined to constantly experience the flames of war. Therefore, under the agitation of his emotions, Tang En seemed to see such a scene in front of his eyes. Rows of soldiers carrying ladders madly rushed to the city wall, and the people on top relied on the advantage of the height to rain arrows down. Among them, only the cold city wall stood still, quietly watching all of this, allowing these insignificant creatures to use their blood to change into new clothes. Cough, cough. After clearing his throat, Tang En's voice was slightly hoarse. "Let's go." Josiah and the others finally came back to their senses and looked at each other. The atmosphere was a little solemn, and the carriage set off again. As they gradually approached the city wall, the solemn atmosphere slowly dissipated and was replaced by waves of excited discussions. Everyone naturally had reason to be happy because this was their city. In the future, it would be like a barrier that would always protect them. In just a moment, the carriage arrived at the city gate. Up close, it was a bustling scene. The people of the Grey Coat Army were chanting as they carried pieces of logs and boulders up the city wall. There were specialized people there to guide and disassemble these things or to put them down. "Hey, Miss Josiah is back." "Hello, Miss Josiah." When they arrived, some people also recognized Josiah and waved to greet him. Of course, there were more unfamiliar faces, but they must have heard of this name before. They also learned to wave and take off their hats to greet him. Josiah seemed very excited. His eyes were slightly red, but his smile never faded as he constantly returned the greetings. As more and more people greeted him, he finally simply bowed in all directions. As for Tang En and the others, they were completely reduced to supporting roles. Although there were many people here who knew them, after all, they were heroes in the past. However, due to the influence of the subsequent events, it was inevitable that they gave people a feeling that it was not easy to get along with them. Say something, Tang En suddenly said to Josiah. The surroundings were too noisy. Josiah turned his head in confusion. I mean, you should say something to them, Tang En repeated loudly. Josiah was stunned. Then, he looked at Tang En's constantly hinting eyes and pursed his lips in realization. He looked around at the lively crowd and hesitated for a moment before he turned around and stepped on the roof of the carriage. The intention of Tang En's action was very simple. Since Josiah was the future hero of the Grey Coat Army, such a scene should not be missed. There were a large number of familiar and unfamiliar people here, so it was necessary to leave an impression. Then, after her actions in the city spread, her reputation would definitely rise to another level. Josiah, who dared to promote in front of thousands of unfamiliar citizens, naturally did not have stage fright. He bowed and pressed his hands slightly. Like a conductor of an orchestra, the surrounding voices immediately became much softer and quieter. Hello everyone, I'm a leader of the publicity department. My name is Josiah. Pointing at the city wall beside him, Josiah's smile was very bright. First of all, I have to thank you. Thank you for building this extraordinary and far-reaching city. It will be the first strong fortress of our Grey Coat Army and our warmest home. Thank you. He bowed straight and his golden brown hair hung down. Clap, 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 amidst the thunderous applause, everyone held their heads high, their faces filled with pride. Maybe some of you don't know, when I left here more than 10 days ago, the city wall was not like this. Josiah nodded his head and made a playful expression. Well, at that time it was full of holes, like cheese that has been left for a long time and has been corroded. Ha ha. Oh, forgive me, I really haven't eaten cheese in a long time. Ha ha! Come to Auntie tomorrow, Auntie will make it for you. Ha ha! Tang En raised his eyebrows and looked at Josiah, who was completely acting as himself but could naturally drive the emotions of the crowd. He secretly gave him a thumbs up. If you compare yourself to others, you'll die. If you compare goods, you'll throw them away. Some people often went on stage and carefully prepared a long speech. They spat out lotus flowers, exhausted their saliva, and even shouted themselves hoarse. In the end, they might not be able to get a sincere response from the people below. However, there were some people who simply stood on the stage. Even if they didn't have much experience, they could still make everyone listen, applaud, and laugh willingly with just a few words. This was talent. They were born with it, and there was no way to be envious of them. Josiah's speech didn't last long, only a few minutes, but the effect was unquestionable. This could be seen directly from the fact that after they left, those people still praised and discussed with smiles on their faces. After entering the city gate, other than the overly wide area, the city didn't give them any surprises. It was still the simple wooden houses when they set off, but there were more of them now. This made the people who had just seen the majestic city wall feel like it was ruined on the inside. But this was understandable. Because of the increasing number of people joining, the construction was progressing quickly. But of course, all of this had to be done with the city wall first. After all, everyone knew that with the philosophy of the Grey Coat Army, it was only a matter of time before they were attacked by the Brand government. After walking for a short distance, Tang En and the others were stopped by a young man in a gray shirt. The news he brought was that Rosa and the ministers were waiting for them in the house. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 276. The interior of the city wall was much larger than when Tang En and the others had set out. Rosa's hut was also not where it used to be. It seemed to have been moved to the rear. That's the residential area, the barracks. A square will be built here in the future. I hope that the statue of the leader can be erected here. Oh, of course, Miss Josiah's statue is fine too. The area behind has been reclaimed. It was originally a place for bandits, but that's not important now. What's important is that it will become our logistics granary in the future. As we can see now, there are too many things going on in the base. The leader hasn't left the hut for a few days, so I'm sorry, she can't come to welcome you. The gray-clothed youth seemed to be very talkative as he explained while leading the way. The importance of the city's publicity plan was self-evident. It was related to the future of the Gray Coat Army. Logically speaking, if Rosa could free himself, he would definitely come to welcome them. But now, Tang En and the others looked at the bustling scene and nodded understandingly. It's nothing. Tang En spread his hands. Just as he was about to say something, he looked ahead and raised his eyebrows in surprise. TSK, damn it, don't touch there. Io, these guys are really King ruthless. TSK, I didn't let them have it easy. I punched one of them in the face. A large group of soldiers holding wooden sticks and wearing simple wooden armor walked over from the south. Their situation did not look good. Almost all of them had bruises on their faces. At a glance, they were all bruised and swollen like a panda head. However, it could be seen that they were all external injuries that would heal automatically in a few days. This is the idea of Commander Borg from the tactical department. There are too many new recruits in the past few months, so the effect of training alone is not obvious. So after planning the military structure, Borg proposed that each army should fight against each other in a hypothetical war. As for them, well, they should have just been defeated. Understood. Tang En nodded. David, on the other hand, curled his lips disapprovingly. What hypothetical war? Wasn't it just copying the simulation battle that they often used? After a while, the gray-clothed youth pointed at the wooden house in the distance and said, "There, it's that, Before he could finish his words, the door of the wooden house opened. Luo Sha and several other ministers walked out and stood in a row at the door, smiling as they looked over. It was obvious that they were welcoming their return. Aunt Luo Sha. Leader. Seeing this, Josiah, Tang En, and the others couldn't help but feel a little move. They hurriedly stepped forward and saluted. The Gray Coat Army's words were not empty. Now that the Gray Coat Army was about to expand, Luo Sha and the others were naturally very busy. His actions had reached the extreme, which meant that he hadn't forgotten about them. Haha, our little Rosa is back. Everyone, let's welcome him. Old General Omeng still liked to tease Josiah. He laughed and clapped his hands. There's also the position of Chief Magician. All right. After a few teasing words, Luo Sha chuckled and grabbed the shy Josiah. Let's talk inside. Luo Sha's house was as ordinary as usual. It was only a few 100 feet long. Naturally, the people here couldn't all go in. In the end, only Tang En, Josiah, David Michaud, and the 3 leaders of the publicity department went in. Haha, not bad. Luo Sha led Josiah to his seat and chuckled. Well, nothing has changed. It's good that you're back. Even if they hadn't tried it before, everyone here knew the difficulty of publicity in the city. Unlike the villages, the city was the foundation of the brand's noble class. Naturally, the defense there was tight. It was normal to be caught accidentally. So when he saw Josiah and the others return safely, Luo Sha was very happy. Of course, this sentence also contained a layer of protection. It was good that they were back. How the matter was done was secondary. After a few words of greeting, they finally returned to the main topic. Everyone looked at Josiah. The publicity in the villages was effective. Now it was time to see the potential of the city. Josiah got up, walked a few steps to the center, and began to talk about what had happened in the past 10 days. First, it was the first publicity. That was when everyone went out to post big words in the night. After briefly mentioning the difficulties, Josiah focused on the attitude of the citizens when they first met. Luo Sha and the others kept nodding when they heard this. It was a preliminary impression of the citizens' reaction. To be honest, this impression was mixed. There were still citizens who wanted to resist, and there were quite a few of them. But it must also be seen that some people were deeply influenced by the official publicity and were very resistant to the Grey Coat Army. The latter was conceivable. After all, they saw this every day. Even if the content was false, under the long-term influence of hearing and seeing, they would unconsciously choose to believe it. After talking about the publicity a few days ago, Josiah's voice sank, and he sadly talked about Colin. Colin saw that the publicity had been lukewarm. He was anxious and decided to take the risk to go to the square in the city. At that time, he was right in front of us. He pulled out his sword and killed another person. In the end, he bit his tongue and committed suicide. Sigh, the small house was silent. Only Josiah's final sigh could be heard. She was sad about Colin's death. Because of Tang Yin's prank, Colin was the first person Josiah met in the publicity department. Later, he even became a team leader in her team. She remembered that when they set off, the optimistic Colin encouraged her that the plan would succeed. But in the end, he became the sacrifice of this trip to the city. Luo Sha and the others were also a little shocked and sad. They were shocked by his perseverance and turned the tables in one fell swoop. They were sad because of his tragic actions and the ultimate sacrifice. Colin doesn't have a family. Luo Sha pursed her lips and fell into deep thought. When Tang Yen first met Luo Sha, it was Colin who introduced him. At that time, he was still an assistant to Luo Sha, so the latter naturally had an impression of him. After a while, Luo Sha said to the ministers, "Well, we have been thinking about setting up a reward medal recently. Let's set Colin's medal as one of them. It will reward those who are not afraid of sacrificing for the cause of change. Also, let the publicity department write down Colin's story in detail and send it to everyone in the Grey Coat Army." Okay. The publicity minister nodded. When a force gradually took shape and grew bigger, some rules, rewards, and punishment measures must be put in place. Just like the previous military establishment and the medal system that was going to be set up now. Because of cultural reasons, the people in this world generally valued glory. For example, when some knights were charging, they would always talk about glory. In the past, the Grey Coat Army's reward measures were very simple. It was a simple promotion or more rice and meat. Now, it was finally like the Bran Empire, setting up a medal system. This kind of medal, the person who received it must be deeply honored. And if someone was specially set up a medal because of outstanding contributions, then it would be an even more amazing achievement. Luo Sha's move undoubtedly sent Colin directly into the history of the Grey Coat Army. As long as this group existed, Colin's name would be remembered forever. After dealing with this topic, the ministers spoke one after another. "Joshua, for you to be able to reach this step, it is already a success. Yes, as long as the foundation is laid, the city's publicity plan can always continue to be implemented. Your operation this time has accumulated a lot of experience and lessons, and this is very important." Looking at the sincere old ministers, Josiah, who had just adjusted his mood, blinked and was a little stunned for a moment. What's going on? These seem to be concluding words of encouragement, but shouldn't they be said at the end? But I'm not done yet. It was not the old minister's fault for misunderstanding. In their view, since Josiah and the others had exposed their whereabouts, the next step was naturally to leave the city in a hurry to avoid the police's search. Ahem. After clearing his throat, there was silence all around. Tang En stood up and bowed to the people around him, then spread his hands. Leader Luo Sha, ministers, there is still a publicity event to follow. There's more. The old ministers looked at each other and were shocked speechless. In that kind of situation, what publicity was there to do? Some of them frowned slightly and looked at Josiah. Thinking of her stubborn personality, they guessed that the other party was unwilling to admit defeat and continued to force the publicity despite the danger. The people sitting here were all experienced and prudent people, so they naturally did not appreciate such behavior. It was not cowardice, this was a way of doing things that had been accumulated over many years. Young people dared to take risks, while old people preferred to do things gently and steadily. Nodding at Josiah, Tang En said, "Next, let me say it." That night, according to Josiah's idea, we avoided the police's search while making all kinds of preparations. The next morning, in the city square, without any hesitation, Tang En narrated the events that happened after that in a flat and straightforward manner. The content was, of course, true, but there were some things that Tang En purposely skipped over. For example, Josiah's impulsive decision, Tang En's preparation for the whole night, the gray space blocking the police cavalry, the part about Alan. It was still the same thing, but with Tang En's skillful narration, Josiah's image was undoubtedly highlighted to a large extent. Up to this point, even David and the others who were present did not feel that there was anything wrong. As for Josiah, she was even more confused. Did I do so many things? I just went on stage and said a few words. Why is it all about me? After that, the room fell into silence. But it was not the kind of absolute silence, because there was a strange atmosphere that could not be seen clearly. Rosa and the other department heads' expressions were not that of shock. Shocked expressions had appeared many times during the narration, and now they had a kind of fascination on their faces. It was as if they wanted to use Tang En's previous words to form a grand scene in their minds. A simple platform, a young girl screaming at the top of her lungs, tens of thousands of excited people, and countless undercurrents surging inside and outside of the square. After a while, Rosa took a deep breath and said seriously to the head of the publicity department, "Write this too, yes, write it immediately, publish it immediately. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 277. Most of the things in the world were only about the results, not the process. No matter how casual Tang En was, the way Josiah chose to do things in the city square was not appreciated by some of the old ministers. But when the results came out, all of this was for naught. There were many ways to reach the destination, and arguing about which one was the closest was not very meaningful, because the winner would be the one who reached it in the end. Josiah had succeeded, and the effect was even better than expected. She let everyone see how strong the resistance was under the surface of the citizens' forbearance. And this was what Rosa and the others valued, because it meant that the concept of the Grey Coat Army was very promising. Praise was everywhere. When the results came out, people often turned the cause into the cause. Previously, they secretly said that she was too young and impulsive, but after saying it out loud, she became young, aggressive, adventurous, and so on. It could be said that these old ministers used to call Josiah Little Rosa, which was more or less a joke. Yes, Josiah's contribution was great, especially the big character poster plan. But don't forget when this title came out. They knew everything that happened at the negotiating table before, and the manipulation behind those rumors. But now, after this battle, they looked at Josiah seriously, even solemnly. Not to mention anything else, under such circumstances, how many people would really dare to stand up? Tang En and Rosa were the most happy about this change. The matter of erecting the Grey Coat Army hero was Rosa's own plan, and she did not discuss it with others. Later, she told Tang En and Josiah one after another, and it became a little secret among the three of them. She did this not because she did not trust others, but because there was only one hero, and this glory was something that everyone wanted. Now, although the people here liked Josiah, when it came to benefits and glory, it was hard to guarantee that no one would have any other thoughts. So, although Bosk and the other ministers had vaguely guessed the hero plan, they did not know the inside story. Now, they were only praising Josiah's ability because of these great contributions. And this was exactly what Luo Sha wanted to achieve. When Josiah silently pushed his reputation to the top, he would naturally become the hero of the Grey Coat Army. By then, no one would be able to object. Of course, this was only Tang En and Luo Sha's rough plan. It was still too early to think about it. When the praises finally died down, Josiah suppressed his excitement and proposed to continue the city's publicity plan. The result was self-evident. It was a unanimous vote. However, the head of the logistics department was a little conflicted. As the number of people kept increasing, the logistics department was under a lot of pressure. If they waited for the people from the city to join in. The old minister was at a loss recently. Since when did the Grey Coat Army have to worry about having too many people join? Josiah had the most right to speak about the city's publicity plan. She had been prepared for this for a long time. She proposed to set up a hidden spot in the city first, and then slowly develop the strategy. Naturally, a public speech like the one in Riva City Square could not be held again. That time, there was a large degree of luck involved. The Grey Coat Army originally had secret organizations in many cities responsible for collecting information. However, previously they mainly collected information about whether there was an encirclement or not. Therefore, the functions of these organizations were very simple and low-level. They did not form an efficient whole at all. Some places did not even have such organizations, such as Riva City. And this was the most fatal because if the news about the Grey Coat Army did not spread for a long time, and there were no posters in the city, it was hard to guarantee that the nobles would not be impulsive and raise their knives against the people again. There were also more posters that were suitable for the people who were more cultured and had higher levels of literacy. After discussing bits and pieces for a while, David secretly yawned countless times, and the report finally came to an end. It did not end naturally. Instead, it was because an officer came to look for old General Omeng. He seemed to be reporting about some hypothetical war. Losha also knew that now was not the time to discuss this, and there was no need for so many unrelated people, so he simply put this matter aside and let Josiah and the others, who had just returned, rest first. Tang En dragged Josiah, who was still unsatisfied, out of the door. His ears twitched, and he heard one rough and one soft breathing behind him. Needless to say, it was David and Michaud. They were not interested in this kind of thing at all. At this moment, with a cry of surprise, Tang En felt a black shadow pounce on him, and then a warm jade-like body fell heavily into his arms. Of course, Tang En knew who it was. He touched the soft hair of the other party and smiled. "Ha ha, little Carol, did you miss brother Tang En?" "No," she answered straightforwardly, but her two small arms were still tightly wrapped around Tang En's neck. She complained, "You didn't even bring me to the city to play." Tang En touched his nose slightly awkwardly. There were too many variables and dangers on the trip to Riva City. Therefore, Tang En did not bring little Carol, but entrusted her to Fry and the others. Turning his head to stare at David and Michaud, who were snickering behind him, Tang En waved his hand and greeted, "Greetings, Brother Fry. Sorry to trouble you. Brother Tang En." Fry, who was standing not far away, waved his hand with a smile. "What are you talking about? I'm Carol's uncle." Tang En patted his forehead. "I misspoke. I'll buy you a drink later to apologize." "Haha, that's great. I'll go and call some of my old buddies." Fry laughed heartily. "Don't be so cruel." Tang En scratched his head helplessly. Fry and the others were really good at drinking. Even that skinny monkey, who looked like a bamboo pole, could easily put him down. Boss, it's okay. We have more buddies now. David, who was worried about being caught laughing, reminded him attentively. Yes. Tangen's eyes lit up. There were now more than 40 people in the gray space, while Frey's gatekeeping team only had 20 people. The advantage was obvious. He immediately nodded and waved his hand generously. Then let's do it. Let's go now. Are you sure? Fry looked at him with a smile. Tang En subconsciously felt that something was wrong. Little Carol in his arms was also secretly pulling his hair to remind him. Before Tang En could go back on his word, Fry laughed loudly. Haha, you said it yourself. By the way, I forgot to tell you. I've been promoted recently. I'm now a squadron leader. I don't have many subordinates, but I can still gather 60 or 70 of them. Brother Tang En, you're so stupid. Little Carol pouted and whispered. Damn. Tang En's vision went black and he was about to fall. After coming back to his senses, his first reaction was disbelief. Brother Fry, you're not bragging, are you? Have there been any battles recently? This suspicion was, of course, well-founded. Under normal circumstances, warriors could only be promoted if they killed enemies on the battlefield. Battles? That's every day. Brother, I made a few small contributions in the imaginary battles, so, hee. Fry curled his lips and revealed a deep smile. F***ck, I forgot about that. Tang En touched his forehead, knowing that he couldn't avoid it. He sighed. Isn't this my own fault? David on the side also opened his mouth wide, then rolled his eyes and said, boss, I suddenly remembered that there's still something I haven't done. Don't even think about it. Tang En refused without hesitation and casually pointed to the members of the gray space. What are you looking at? You all want to go. What a joke. If he died, of course everyone would die together. The surrounding area was immediately filled with wails, and then everyone looked at David, the initiator of this, with resentful eyes. The latter shrunk his head and obediently retreated behind Michaud. At this moment, a voice sounded, You're Fry? Fry from the Spear Formation Breaking Team? Fry was stunned, then turned his head and saluted, Hello, sir. The one who spoke was the senior officer who went to report to old General O Meng. He took a step back and pursed his lips. I can't accept the salute of the famous Spear Formation Breaking Team's captain. Huh? Tang En furrowed his brows. Such a tone was rather unpleasant. Sir, you must be joking. Frey's expression didn't change. I'm just a squadron leader, of course I have to salute you when I see you. The senior officer narrowed his eyes. So, sir, you're going to return the salute now? The Grey Coat Army did have such a rule. After the subordinates saluted, the senior officer had to return the salute. Of course, this was not mandatory, after old General O Meng entered the barracks, just the guards returning the salute would take a lot of time. No, this is the sir's freedom. From what you're saying, it sounds like you're not convinced. Sir, you misunderstand. The more Tang En listened, the more upset he became. He turned his head and asked, Carol, do you know what's going on? Little Carol nodded. I know, Uncle Fry has recently defeated a lot of people. Listening to Little Carol's explanation, Tang En finally understood what was going on. After the implementation of the new military organization, Fry and the others were assigned to the Fourth Army because they were new recruit. Recently, because of the imaginary war, the various legions were competing fiercely. Although it was just a drill, everyone wanted to win. The various legions attached great importance to such a confrontation, secretly mobilizing troops and generals. And among them, the Fourth Army shone brightly, winning more than losing. The main reason for this was Frey's Spear Formation Breaking Team. In every confrontation, they were always the first to open a gap and form a partial breakthrough. In this way, the other party had no choice but to transfer soldiers from other fronts to resist, to prevent them from rushing straight to the headquarters. However, Fry and the others were indeed very strong, and ordinary teams really couldn't stop them. In the end, the other party could only transfer soldiers again. This repeated, and the military deployment was completely disrupted, so it was natural for them to lose. In a dignified confrontation between a regiment and even a division, in the end, the outcome was dominated by a small team. This made people feel depressed. The high-ranking officer in front of him had undoubtedly suffered this loss before. "I heard you say drinking just now? Since when were the gray-coat army soldiers allowed to drink as they pleased?" Perhaps because he couldn't find a way out, or because he couldn't find a loophole in his words, the high-ranking officer recalled the words he had heard just now and immediately questioned. Before Fry could answer, Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes and stepped out. "I was the one who asked him to drink. Why, do you have a problem with that?" To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 278. I was the one who asked him to drink. Why? Do you have a problem with that? Victory and defeat were common on the battlefield, and there shouldn't be any more entanglements. It was only because of an inconspicuous team that the entire army had collapsed. It was inevitable that they would feel aggrieved. This senior officer had suffered such a loss, and his colleagues had teased him about it recently. Now that he finally saw Fry, he couldn't help but start making things difficult for him. Of course, it was impossible for him to do anything out of line. At most, he would just embarrass Fry and vent his anger. Fry had been in the army for most of his life, so he naturally understood this. Therefore, he had always been neither servile nor overbearing, waiting for the other party to feel bored and leave on his own. Tang En respected Fray's plan. Moreover, this was a matter of the military system and really had nothing to do with his gray space. Therefore, at first, he just listened to little Carol explain the reasons and didn't have any intention of forcefully interfering. But after the senior officer used the excuse of drinking to make things difficult, Tang En couldn't stand it anymore. It was fine if he gave him some face, but what was the meaning of making things difficult for him again and again? The senior officer looked at Tang En and frowned. "Who are you?" The gray space was very famous, and that was true. When he said this name, the old men of the gray coat army basically had an impression of it. But if it was someone in the team, then it wasn't necessarily the case. Like leader, like subordinate. Under Tang En's influence, the gray space team was generally secretive and low-key. Those who could recognize him face to face were basically only familiar people. Although the senior officer felt that Tang En looked a little familiar, he really couldn't remember who he was. However, when he went in to report just now, he saw Tang En in the room. He guessed that the other party was someone of status, so his tone was a little gentler. He's not your subordinate anyway. There's no need to salute you." These words weren't said by Tang En, but by Harry on the side. The older members of the gray space had known Fry for a long time and had even gone through life and death together in the mine. On top of that, they were well aware of the capabilities of this serious-looking middle-aged man with a weathered face. They had already lowered their stance, but the other party was still aggressive. Naturally, they were indignant. "Good. All right." The senior officer let out a cold breath. His gaze was as sharp as a knife, but he immediately restrained himself. "You're not from the military, right?" Seeing that Tang En and the others did not deny it, he continued, "In that case, as a senior officer, I am lecturing my subordinates. What right do you have to interrupt?" What he said made sense. No one who could make it this far was a fool. Although he was very dissatisfied with Tang En and the others, the senior officer still decided to leave them alone for now. Tang En raised his eyebrows. "We have no intention of interfering with the military, and we weren't interrupting just now. You took the initiative to ask me just now. Why don't you take back your question?" I can pretend you didn't say anything. This sentence was very sincere. You want me to not interfere? Fine, you can take back what you just said about who let you drink. The senior officer's chest tightened when he heard this. Take it back? What a joke. A soldier's words were like a nail. How could he take them back so easily? Of course, most of these were just words spoken out of anger. If they were in a secluded place, he would have accepted them. But in this situation, in this atmosphere, if he took them back, wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face? What if I don't accept them? The senior officer spat out the words with a gloomy face. Oh, it sounds like you're not convinced. Harry continued to tease. The veins on the senior officer's forehead throbbed. This was exactly what he had just said to Fry. But he had his own pride. He ignored Harry and continued to stare straight at Tang En, who was in the lead. Pursing his lips, Tang En said, Then don't blame me for interfering. You should know that you were the one who interrupted the conversation between us friends first. So, your chat is more important than the conversation about the military? The senior officer sneered. Who knows? Tang En said lazily. And there has to be a first come, first served rule. Why don't you wait on the side and let Fry talk to you after we're done talking? Fry smiled bitterly on the side. He said this as if he had a high rank. The senior officer's eyes twitched. He said in a low voice, Fry, do you think so too? This problem could be big or small. If it was small, it was just a verbal dispute. If it was big, it was not taking the military seriously. No matter what, Fry was not suitable to answer. Harry interjected again, Hey, do you have any manners? You're a senior officer. Didn't you hear our boss talking to you? Why are you changing the topic and pretending to be a big shot? Shut up. The senior officer finally got angry after being interrupted again and again. He growled in a low voice. Oh, you're not convinced again? My mouth is on my face. What can you do? Roar! The senior officer's face was as calm as water. He took a step forward and waved his hand to grab Harry's collar. Harry's eyes lit up. He couldn't help but sigh with joy. It's finally here. In fact, he had already set a trap from the beginning when he had stopped Tang En from announcing his name. Coupled with the deliberate teasing at the end, he had finally succeeded in provoking the other party to make the first move. Well, should I fall to the ground or should I fly into the air and spin freely for 3.5 rounds? Pa! Before Harry could choose the diving method, the senior officer's right wrist was grabbed. Fry! Fry! It was Fry who had grabbed him. His eyelids drooped. Sir, they are my friends, bang! The senior officer's body burst into a red light and shook Fry away. Good. Good. A small squadron captain dares to offend your superior. The senior officer put on the red battle energy armor and said gloomily, I've long heard that your strength is outstanding. Today I'm here to test your weight. An arm pushed Fry away. Tang En handed little Carol in his arms to Josiah beside him. I like fighting the most. Let me go first. Tang En interrupted. Brother Fry, I'll take the lead for you. If I lose, you can go first. Fry frowned, but looking at Tang En's determined face, he couldn't help but smile bitterly and step back. Of course, he knew what Tang En meant. If he lost, it would be a joke. This was just to prevent him from being accused of offending his superior. The furious senior officer had already put aside his previous concerns. When he saw Tang En come out, he was a little happy in his heart. First, he would beat up this guy who was in the way, and then he would say that he was obstructing military affairs. After making up his mind, the senior officer closed his fist. Red battle energy surrounded him as he stepped forward. At this moment, bang, the door opened. What are you guys making so much noise for? You guys, wanna fight? The scene suddenly became quiet as they looked at the old man who was at the door. Harry and the others couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. What a pity. Hello, old General O Meng. Greetings, old General O Meng. It was old General Omeng who came out of the Rosa house. He looked at the officer whose battle energy had not completely dissipated, and then looked at Tang En, who was on the other side with an indifferent face. He frowned. "What are you doing?" Tang En bowed. "Sorry to disturb you, old General Omeng. We are preparing to learn from each other, improve together, and improve together." "Nonsense." Old General Omeng opened his mouth and laughed involuntarily. "Who in the station doesn't know the strength of Captain Tang En from the gray space? Who would want to learn from you?" Tang En's eyelids twitched when he heard this. "Old General, you're exaggerating. I just have some self-defense skills." The only person in the base who would dare to agree to this was probably Zwafan. Tang En? Tang En from the gray space? The senior officer's mind was in a mess. He stared blankly at Tang En, who had a calm expression on his face, and Harry and the others behind him, who had a look of pity on their faces. He couldn't help but gasp. The evaluation of Tang En in the station was mixed, but there was one thing that was recognized, and that was that his strength was very high. For specific details, please refer to Bo Lai, who had his leg crushed in front of the tactical department, Goshawk, who was killed during the chaos in the station, and several intermediate warriors who were defeated by him with one move in public. Damn it, I was tricked. The senior officer, who had regained his senses, immediately realized the problem. His heart was filled with resentment, relief, and other emotions. Walter. Omeng looked at the senior officer, who was standing at the side in a daze with a complicated expression. He frowned and turned to ask, "Tang En, tell me what happened." Tang En didn't add any details and simply told the senior officer everything. Omeng frowned and looked at the senior officer, who had regained his senses, and Fry, who was standing at the side. The two of them were silent. It was obvious that they had tacitly agreed. "That's all?" Omeng's expression immediately darkened. "Since it's a matter on the battlefield, of course it has to be settled on the battlefield. It's not shameful to be defeated. We can fight again if we are still alive. What's shameful is to play tricks outside the battlefield. Is such a person worthy of being an officer? I think he's not even worthy of being a soldier." Omeng was very experienced. After listening to Tang En's narration, he guessed what the senior officer called Walter was thinking. He immediately roared angrily. Needless to say, he was a veteran of the battlefield. Every word he spat out was like a tsunami. Walter's figure was ramrod straight. He pursed his lips and lowered his head. Traces of sweat could be seen on his temples. After scolding for a while, Omeng turned his gaze to the side. His expression relaxed slightly. "You're Fry from the Spear Formation Breaking Team?" Fry saluted. "Yes, old General. I've heard of your name before. It was more than 10 years ago." Omeng suddenly said something shocking. "Are you willing to be my assistant?" Walter was stunned. He looked at Fry enviously. His heart was in turmoil. The name assistant sounded insignificant, but he was always by old General Omeng's side, just like a bodyguard. Compared to the latter, the potential of an assistant was much greater. Being in that kind of environment for a long time to observe and learn was valuable for one's horizons, strategic planning, and so on. If one day, old General Omeng felt that you were outstanding enough and sent you to train in the army, you would at least be a commander of a battalion. Your future would be bright. It could be said that from a squadron leader to an assistant, it was not an exaggeration to say that you had reached the heavens in a single step. But Fry saluted again. He raised his head and said seriously, "Thank you for your guidance, old General. However, I won't be rewarded if I don't do anything. Fry still hopes to use the spear in my hand and step on the heads of the enemies with a group of brothers." As expected, Tang En touched his forehead. When Fry had just joined the Grey Coat Army, Losha had already mentioned this opportunity. However, he had rejected it then and still rejected it now. To be honest, Tang En didn't really appreciate this kind of method. However, this was Frey's character. If not, he wouldn't have run thousands of miles to chop off the heads of nobles for his dead brothers. Good, you're imposing. Omeng clapped his hands and smiled. He wasn't angry because of the rejection. After thinking for a while, he turned his head and said, "Tomorrow is the confrontation between the First Army and the Fourth Army?" Walter was stunned. He then replied, "Yes, it's the First Army's Swordsman Regiment and the Fourth Army's Spear Regiment. Add another battalion to the First Army. You'll be in command tomorrow. I've said it before. You have to take revenge on the battlefield. Do you understand?" "Yes. Understood." Walter straightened his back and saluted solemnly. Tang En raised his eyebrows and sighed inwardly. This was the way to control one's subordinate. Although Walter wasn't very broad-minded, the mistake he made today was indeed very small. The harsh reprimand just now had already achieved its effect. Now, this move had turned the little bit of resentment into motivation. It was still the same saying. Things on the battlefield had to be resolved on the battlefield. At this moment, Omeng suddenly turned around and smiled. "Tang En, do you want to try the gray space? Let's see the results of your training method. Of course, you don't have to participate. Just observe with us." Tang En was stunned. Then, he saw Walter's eyes suddenly light up. He smacked his lips and revealed a strange smile. "All right, let's give it a try. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 279. In the afternoon, in a corner of the city, more than a dozen fiery red pots were constantly churning red waves, rising into a continuous mist. The people passing by all subconsciously took a few breaths, suddenly feeling the aroma at the tip of their nose, and a little more warmth in their chest. This was hot pot, and even the newcomers recognized this novel cooking method. Nowadays, as long as they had the conditions, every family would choose to use this method to replace their meals. After a closer look, they found that there were about 100 big men around the pot. However, the food in the hot pot was not ready yet, and most of these people were already drunk. Needless to say, this was Tang En's group, who fulfilled their promise, and the Fry squadron who came to eat and drink excitedly. Originally, Fry and the others had training in the afternoon, but in front of Rose's house, old General Omeng waved his hand and simply allowed them to take half a day off. This caused Tang En and the others to suffer. If it was eating and drinking at night, thinking about tomorrow's battle, Fry and the others would restrain themselves, but now they could only pray, and hope that when they woke up with a hangover tomorrow, they would not be next to a toilet. In the innermost corner, Tang En was now staring at the pot in front of him, concentrating, as if he wanted to see a flaming red lotus in the churning red waves in front of him. "I say, Brother Tang, what you're doing is not right." On the opposite side, Fry looked at Josiah, who was sitting quietly on the side, looking very resentful. Tang En did not seem to hear and still looked straight at the hot pot. Fry was annoyed when he saw this, so he fiercely grabbed the wine glass and took a sip. A man drinking with a woman sitting next to him watching him, of course, he would be a little unhappy. Not to mention that this was Josiah, who was showing a quiet and peaceful temperament. Just a while ago, more than 10 of the Fry squadron members who were ready to move next to him stood up. But after taking 2 steps, they saw Josiah quietly looking at them with a smile, so they touched their hair awkwardly and sat on the other side to invite people to drink. There was a kind of woman who did not need to speak, and you already understood that she said a lot. "Brother Tang, I'll treat you to a drink." Sitting next to Fry, Skinny Monkey, who was like a bamboo pole, raised his glass. "Okay." Tang En simply grabbed the wine glass and clinked it with him. Then, he raised his head and drank. "Refreshing." Again. Skinny Monkey-like looked at the teacup in front of him and swallowed the rest of his words. "Brother Shouho, let me toast you with tea instead of wine. Josiah lowered his head and said in a seemingly embarrassed manner, "Well, okay, thank you, hee." Skinny Monkey smiled bitterly and drank a cup without any taste. Waha! Tangan raised his eyebrows and was overjoyed in his heart. Fortunately, I was smart enough to invite Josiah to take charge. Otherwise, wouldn't I be lying down properly? He glanced around and saw that most of the members of the gray space were already lying on the ground. David, in particular, was in a miserable state. If other members of the gray space were besieged, they would at least have companions to help them. But for David, the members of the gray space looked at the wine glasses in front of him and felt very relieved. Tsk, rest in peace. Tangan smacked his lips and observed a moment of silence for David. Then, he said, "Brother Fry, what's different about being a soldier? Not drinking wine was enough to offend people. Now, naturally, he had to liven up the atmosphere to avoid awkwardness." "Different?" Fry was stunned. He frowned and thought for a while. "It doesn't seem to be anything. It's all about killing people on the battlefield. Well, maybe it's a little different. In the past, we killed more barbarians, but in the future, we might kill more brand people." Tangan opened his mouth and said helplessly, "Can we not talk about killing people? I have some opinions." Skinny Monkey took over the topic and said, "In the past, we killed people for glory and rewards. Now, I don't know why exactly, but looking at the admiring eyes of the people and the bread that they secretly give us from time to time, it feels like we're doing something meaningful." "Well, I have the same feeling. The last time I was patrolling a village, I killed more than 10 bandits who were extorting money. A girl even gave me a garland, haha." A middle-aged man with disheveled hair, nicknamed Crazy, said proudly, "Damn, you still have the nerve to say that. At that time, the girl was obviously looking at me, but you snatched it away and made her face change." "Haha, what about you?" Fry asked casually in the midst of the laughter. "What's your purpose in joining the Grey Coat Army?" Tangan touched his nose. "Do you want to hear the truth or the lie?" His words immediately aroused the interest of the people around him. Fry raised his wine glass. "What's the lie? What's the truth?" Tangan downed his wine glass in one gulp and pretended to be impassioned. "It's a lie. That's to create a country without oppression, exploitation, and special privileges. In this country, everyone is equal, everyone is free, and everyone is fraternal." Okay, pretend I didn't ask. Let's hear the truth." Frey's mouth twitched a few times, and he quickly interrupted. Josiah pursed her lips. In her opinion, these words were very pleasing to the ear. "The truth." Tangan's expression was a little complicated, and then he shrugged. "It's to kill someone." Fry and the others were stunned, and the scene suddenly became a little quiet. Fry frowned and didn't ask why. Instead, he said thoughtfully, "This person is very powerful?" "Even with Brother Tangan's current cultivation, you can't kill him?" Tangan shook his head. "It's one thing to be powerful, but the key is that the people around him are too powerful. Well, the power behind him is also a big problem." "What kind of power?" Skinny Monkey-like asked curiously. Tangan pinched his chin and hesitated a little. "Kid, why don't you keep your mouth shut?" Fry glared at Skinny Monkey-like and waved his hand. "Brother Tang, if you feel embarrassed, then don't say it." Tangan thought for a while and said, "I don't feel embarrassed, hee. I'm mainly afraid that you will feel embarrassed." After saying that, he stretched out his hand and pointed upwards. "What do you mean? Are you going to fight with God?" Madman looked at the sky and was very puzzled. Twain propped his forehead with his hand and grinned. "Damn, do I have the ability to do that? It's the light." Josiah had a flash of inspiration and blurted out, but she hurriedly took back half of her words. Although she didn't say the whole thing, Fry and the others still understood what Josiah meant. They were all shocked and looked at Tangan in amazement. The latter also nodded to show that his guess was correct. "It can't be, Tang, There must be some misunderstanding. Josiah frowned. She was a believer of the Divine Light Church. Although she wasn't fanatical, she didn't lack trust. Tang En's long and narrow eyes narrowed and flashed with a dangerous light. Misunderstanding? Even if I want to think so, the hundreds of innocent villagers who died won't think so. Hundreds of innocent villagers who died? This. Josiah opened her mouth slightly and seemed to want to say something, but after seeing Tang En's expression, she didn't say anything. The others' expressions more or less showed that they didn't believe it. Tang En suddenly felt bored and waved his hand. Forget it, let's not talk about this. You won't believe me even if I tell you. After a pause, he murmured in a low voice, when the strength of the gray space increases, Well, let's not talk about this. Fry wisely gave up the idea of continuing to ask. It wasn't that they were really timid, but the Temple of Light's power was too great. No matter who it was normal to be frightened for a moment. He changed the topic. Right, I forgot to ask. We'll be working with David tomorrow. Do we need to pay attention to anything? TSK, with Walter's breadth of mind, I'm afraid he won't let us go so easily tomorrow. Tang En also instantly adjusted his mood and smiled. You guys just fight according to your own style. Do what you need to do. Don't worry about them. Then what's their fighting style? Wretched, extremely wretched. I taught them, ha. Tang En laughed and looked proud. Fry and the others looked at each other and were speechless. At this moment, a familiar voice sounded. Hello, may I ask if Captain Josiah is here? Tang En turned his head and saw the gray-clothed youth who had brought them to Rosa Hut in the afternoon. He was supporting the drunk David. For some reason, Tang En suddenly had an ominous feeling in his heart. David couldn't even tell north from south, not to mention speak. Fortunately, Josiah stood up and waved his hand. I'm here. What's the matter? The gray-clothed youth hurried over. Captain Josiah, the leader wants to discuss something with you. As soon as he finished speaking, the surroundings became silent. Bang! The wine glass shattered. Tang En's body trembled and his eyes were filled with despair. In contrast, Fry and the others in front of him, as well as the members of the spear formation breaking team, licked their lips and looked at Tang En with sinister smiles. F***CK, can't you change the time? You're playing me to death. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidien. Com to vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.